Later, Lacey tried to find comfort in the thought that even if she had arrived seconds earlier, rather than being in time to help, she would have died with Isabel. But it didn't happen that way. Using the key she had been given as realtor, she had entered the duplex apartment on East 70th Street and called Isabel's name in the exact instant that Isabel screamed, "Don't!" and a gunshot rang out. Faced with a split-second decision to run or to hide, Lacey slammed the apartment door shut and slipped quickly into the hall closet. She had not even had time to fully close that door before a sandy-haired, well-dressed man came running down the stairs. Through the narrow opening she could see his face clearly, and it became imprinted on her mind. In fact, she had seen it before, only hours ago. The expression was now viciously cold, but clearly this was the same man to whom she had shown the apartment earlier in the day, affable Curtis Caldwell from Texas. From her vantage point, she watched as he ran past her, holding a pistol in his right hand and a leather binder under his left arm. He flung open the front door and ran out of the apartment. A primal instinct made her rush out of the closet to shove the door closed behind him. He wheeled around, and for a terrible moment their eyes locked, his pale blue irises like steely ice staring at her. He threw himself against the door, but not fast enough. It slammed shut, and she snapped the deadbolt just as a key clicked in the lock. There was no way Caldwell could get back in. "Isabel, is she alive?" Her hand on the banister, Lacey raced up the thickly carpeted stairs, through the ivory and peach sitting room where in these past weeks she had sat so frequently with Isabel and listened as the grieving mother told her over and over that she still could not believe that the death of her daughter Heather had been an accident. Lacey rushed into the bedroom. Isabel lay crumpled across the bed, her eyes open, her bloodied hand frantically pulling at a sheaf of papers that had been under a pillow beside her. One of the pages fluttered across the room, carried by the breeze from the open window. Lacey dropped to her knees. "Isabel?" It was too late. Lacey could see that. Isabel was dying. Later, that scene was played out in the nightmare that came more and more frequently. She was kneeling beside Isabel's body, listening to the dying woman's last words as Isabel told her about the journal, entreating her to take the pages. Then a hand would touch her shoulder, and when she looked up, there stood the killer, his cold eyes unsmiling, aiming the pistol at her forehead as he squeezed the trigger. It was the week after Labor Day, and from the steady ringing of the phones in the offices of Parker & Parker, it was clear to Lacey that the summer doldrums finally were over. The Manhattan co-op market had been uncommonly slow this past month. Now, finally, things would start to move again. Rick Parker delivered a mug of black coffee to her desk. She reached for the mug. "Thanks, Rick. It's nice to have the sun and air wait on me." "No problem. You look great, Lacey." Lacey tried to ignore the expression on Rick's face. She always felt as though he were undressing her with his eyes. Spoiled, handsome, and the possessor of a phony charm that he turned on at will, he made her distinctly uncomfortable. She wasn't sure which was harder to take, his overly friendly moods or his angry, sarcastic ones. Her phone rang, and she grabbed for it with relief, saved by the bell. "Miss Farrell, this is Isabel Waring. I met you when you sold a co-op in my building last spring. I'm putting my daughter's apartment on the market, and if it's convenient, I'd like you to handle it for me." "It would be very convenient, Mrs. Waring." Lacey made an appointment with her for the following morning. As she hung up, she turned to Rick. "What luck! 3 East 70th. That's a great building." "What apartment?" 10B. Do you know that one by any chance?" "Why would I know it, Lacey? Especially since my father, in his wisdom, kept me working the West Side for 5 years. He shrugged, then made his way to his own office, which overlooked East 62nd Street. Lacey's windows faced Madison Avenue. She reveled in the sight of the constant traffic, the hordes of tourists. Her father, Jack Farrell, had felt that way about the city. From the time she was little, they had explored New York City together. "We're pals, Lace," he would say. "You're like me, a city slicker. Now your mother, God love her, yearns to join the flight to the suburbs. It's to her credit that she sticks it out here, knowing I'd wither on the vine there." Lacey had inherited not only Jack's love of this city, but his Irish coloring as well. Fair skin, blue-green eyes, and dark brown hair. Her sister Kit shared their mother's English heritage, china blue eyes and hair the shade of winter wheat. A musician, Jack Farrell had worked in the theater, usually in the pit orchestra, although sometimes playing in clubs and the occasional concert. His sudden death, just as she had finished college, was still a shock. After the funeral, her mother, Mona Farrell, had decided not to stay in the city. A pediatric nurse, she bought a condo in New Jersey. She wanted to be near Lacey's sister Kit and her family. Once there, she'd taken a job with a local hospital. Fresh out of college, Lacey had found a small apartment on East End Avenue and a job at Parker & Parker Realtors. Now, 8 years later, she was one of their top agents. Humming, she pulled out the file on 3 East 70th and began to study it. "I sold the second-floor duplex," she thought. "Nice-size rooms, high ceilings, kitchen needed modernizing. Now to find out something about Mrs. Waring's place." Whenever possible, Lacey liked to do her homework on a prospective listing. It was fortunate that she was good friends with Tim Powers, the superintendent of 3 East 70th. She called him and finally worked the conversation around to the Waring apartment. According to Tim, Isabel Waring was the mother of Heather Landy, a young singer and actress who had just begun to make her name in the theater. The daughter as well of famed restaurateur Jimmy Landy. Heather had died early last winter, killed when her car plunged down an embankment as she was driving home from a weekend of skiing in Vermont. The apartment had belonged to Heather, and now her mother was apparently selling it. "Mrs. Waring can't believe Heather's death was an accident," Tim said. When she finally got off the phone, Lacey sat for a long moment, remembering that she had seen Heather Landy last year in a very successful off-Broadway musical. She had it all, Lacey thought, beauty, stage presence, and that marvelous contralto voice. A 10, as Dad would have said. No wonder her mother is in denial. Lacey shivered, then rose to turn down the air conditioner. On Tuesday morning, Isabel Waring walked through her daughter Heather's apartment, studying it as if with the critical eye of a realtor. Isabel realized that not everyone would care for the birch paneling and splashy marble foyer tiles Heather had loved, but those could easily be changed. After months of brief trips to New York from Cleveland, and after repeatedly meeting with Heather's friends, Isabel knew it had to be over. She had to put an end to this searching for reasons and get on with her life. The fact remained, however, that she just didn't believe Heather's death had been an accident. She knew her daughter. She simply would not have been foolish enough to start driving home from Stowe in a snowstorm, especially so late at night. The medical examiner had been satisfied, however, and Jimmy was satisfied because Isabel knew that if he hadn't been, he'd have torn up all of Manhattan looking for answers. Jimmy Landy had loved Heather more than anything in the world, and next to her he loved power, Isabel thought bitterly. It's what had ended their marriage. His famous restaurant, his investments, now his Atlantic City hotel and casino. No room for me ever, Isabel thought. Maybe if he had taken on a partner years ago, the way he has Steve Abbott now, our marriage wouldn't have failed. She stopped at a window overlooking Fifth Avenue. New York was especially beautiful in September. She used to take Heather's baby carriage over to the park on days like this. "Why did you throw it away, Heather? After that accident, when you were a child, when you saw that car skid off the road and crash, you were always terrified of icy roads. You were only 24 years old. What happened that night? What made you take that drive? Or who made you?" The buzzing of the intercom jolted Isabel back from the smothering pangs of hopeless regret. It was the doorman announcing that Miss Farrell was here for her 10 o'clock appointment. Lacey was not prepared for Isabel Waring's effusive, if nervous, greeting. "Good heavens, you look younger than I remembered. How old are you? 30? My daughter would have been 25 next week, you know. She lived in this apartment. It was hers. Her father bought it for her. Oh, he couldn't do enough for her. But it never spoiled her. Now he wants me to sell the apartment and keep the money. He says Heather would have wanted me to have it." Lacey asked the question she needed to have answered. "Are you sure you want to sell?" Isabel Waring's face crumbled as her eyes filled with tears. "I want to find out why my daughter died. Why she rushed out of the ski lodge that night. Why she didn't wait and come back with friends the next morning as she had planned. But her father wants me to stop pestering people, and I suppose he's right, that we have to go on, so... Yes, Lacey, I guess I want to sell." After her appointment with Isabel Waring and a full afternoon of work, that night Lacey made the 25-mile drive to Wyckoff, New Jersey, where her sister Kit and her mother both lived. Kit's husband, Jay Taylor, was the highly successful owner of a large restaurant supply business, but had never been one of Lacey's favorite people. She reminded herself that Kit clearly was crazy about him, and between them they'd produced 3 great kids, so who was she to criticize? If only he wasn't so damn pompous, she thought. As she turned onto Route 4, she realized how anxious she was to see the others in her family, her mother, Kit and the kids, Todd 12, Andy 10, and her special pet, shy 4-year-old Bonnie. Her mother answered the door and gave her a warm hug. "Kit's in the kitchen. Jay went to pick up the children, and there's someone inside I want you to meet." Lacey was surprised and somewhat shocked to see that a man she didn't recognize was standing near the massive fireplace in the family room, sipping a drink. Her mother blushingly introduced him as Alex Carbine, explaining that they had known each other years ago and had just met again through Jay, who had sold him much of the equipment for a new restaurant he just opened in the city on West 46th Street. Shaking his hand, Lacey assessed the man. About 60, mom's age. Good, solid-looking guy. As soon as she could excuse herself, she went into the state-of-the-art kitchen where Kit was tossing the salad. She asked her sister, "How long has this been going on?" Kit, her blonde hair pulled back at the nape of her neck, looked for all the world like a Martha Stewart ad. She grinned. "About a month. He's nice. Jay brought him by for dinner and Mom was here. Alex is a widower. He's always been in the restaurant business, but this is the first place he's had on his own, I gather. We've been there. He's got a nice setup." They both jumped at the sound of a door slamming at the front of the house. "Brace yourself, Lacey. Jay and the kids are home." The boys greeted Lacey with their usual exuberance. Bonnie, shy as always, snuggled up to her. At dinner, Todd, who was showing an interest in real estate and his aunt's job, asked Lacey about the market in New York. "Picking up. In fact, I took on a promising new listing today." She told them about Isabel Waring, then noticed that Alex Carbine showed sudden interest. "Do you know her?" Lacey asked. "No, but I know Jimmy Landy, and I'd met their daughter, Heather. A terrible tragedy." "Jay, you've done business with Landy over the years. You must have met Heather, too." Lacey watched in astonishment as her brother-in-law's face turned a dark red. "No, never met her. I used to do business with Landy. Now, who's ready for another slice of lamb?" It was 7 o'clock. The bar was crowded, and the dinner crowd was starting to arrive. Jimmy Landy knew he should go downstairs and greet people, but he just didn't feel like it. This had been one of the bad days, a depression brought on by a call from Isabel, evoking the image of Heather trapped and burning to death in the overturned car. The slanting light from the setting sun flickered through the tall windows of his paneled office in the brownstone on West 56th Street, the home of Venetia, the restaurant Jimmy had opened 30 years ago. Now Venetia was one of the most popular places to dine in Manhattan. Jimmy sat thinking about the reasons he found it so difficult to go downstairs. It wasn't just the phone call from his ex-wife. The restaurant was decorated with murals of Venice, and from the beginning they had included scenes in which Heather appeared. When she was 2, he had the artist paint her in as a toddler whose face appeared in a window of the Doge's palace. As a young girl, she was seen being serenaded by a gondolier. When she was 20, she'd been painted in as a young woman strolling across the Bridge of Sighs, a song sheet in her hand. Jimmy knew that for his own peace of mind, he would have to have her painted out of the murals. But just as Isabel had not been able to let go of the idea that Heather's death must be someone else's fault, he could not let go of the constant need for his daughter's presence. He had gotten through the last months by concentrating on the casino and hotel he was building in Atlantic City. "Donald Trump move over," Heather had said when he'd showed her the model. "How about calling it Heather's Place, and I'll perform there? Yours exclusively, Baba." She had picked up the affectionate nickname for father on a trip to Italy when she was 10. After that, she never called him Daddy again. Jimmy remembered his answer. "I'd give you star billing in a minute. But how about forgetting this career stuff and getting married and giving me some grandchildren?" Heather had laughed. "Oh, Baba, give me a couple of years. I'm having too much fun." Now there wouldn't be any grandchildren ever. A tap at the door yanked Jimmy back to the present. "Come in, Steve," he said. Thank God I have Steve Abbott, he thought. 25 years ago, the handsome blonde Cornell dropout had knocked on the door of the restaurant before it was open. "I want to work for you, Mr. Landy," he had announced. "I can learn more from you than in any college course." That was a good day for me, Jimmy thought. He might have looked like a spoiled preppy, but he was born for this business. Steve Abbott pushed open the door and turned on the nearest light as he entered the room. "Why so dark? Having a séance, Jimmy? The mayor just came in with a party of 4. Jimmy shoved back his chair and stood up. At 68, he still gave the impression of animal strength. "No one told me he had a reservation." "He didn't. His Honor couldn't resist our hot dogs, I suppose." In long strides, Abbott crossed the room and put his hand on Landy's shoulder. "A rough day, I can tell." "Yeah, Isabel called this morning to say the realtor was in about Heather's apartment and thinks it will sell fast. Of course, every time she gets me on the phone, she has to go through it all again. How she doesn't believe Heather's death was an accident. She can't let go of it. Drives me crazy." Abbott knew the story and with compassion said, "Come on, Jimmy, the mayor's waiting." In the next few weeks, Lacey brought 8 potential buyers to see the apartment. 2 were clearly window shoppers, the kind whose hobby was wasting realtors' time. When Rick Parker stopped by her desk early one evening as she was getting ready to go home, she said, "You never know. You take someone around for a year, you want to kill yourself before you go out with her again. Then what happens? The person you're ready to give up on writes a check for $1 million co-op." Rick's aristocratic features showed his disdain. "Lacey, you have more patience than I do. My father wants to know if you've had any real nibbles on the Waring apartment." "I don't think so, Rick, but hey, it's still a new listing and tomorrow is another day." "Thank you, Scarlett O'Hara. I'll pass that on to him. See ya." Lacey locked her desk drawer and suddenly realized that she was very tired. She had been living in a whirl, getting new listings, catching up with friends, having Kit's kids in for a weekend, and devoting an awful lot of time to Isabel Waring. The woman had taken to calling her daily, frequently urging her to come by the apartment. "Lacey, you must join me for lunch," or just, "Lacey, on your way home, stop in and have a glass of wine with me, won't you? The New England settlers used to call twilight sober light. It's a lonesome time of day." Lacey stared out into the street. Long shadows were slanting across Madison Avenue. It is a lonesome time of day, Lacey thought. It's little enough to ask that I spend time with Isabel and listen to her. Actually, I like Isabel very much, but sharing Isabel's pain brings back everything I felt when Dad died. She stood up. I'm going to go home and collapse. I need to. 2 hours later, at 9 o'clock, Lacey, fresh from 20 minutes in the swirling jacuzzi, was happily preparing a BLT. The telephone rang. She let the answering machine take it. It was Isabel Waring. Lacey, you're not home. I had to share this. I found Heather's journal in the big storage closet. There's something in it that makes me think I'm not crazy for believing her death wasn't an accident. I won't say any more now. I'll talk to you tomorrow. Listening, Lacey shook her head, then impulsively turned off the answering machine and the ringer on the phone. She didn't even want to know if more people tried to reach her. A quiet evening, a sandwich, a glass of wine, and a book. I've earned it, she told herself. As soon as she got to the office in the morning, Lacey paid the price for having turned off the answering machine the night before. Her mother called, and an instant later Kit phoned. Both were checking up on her. While she was trying to reassure her sister, Rick appeared in her office, looking decidedly annoyed. Isabel Waring has to talk to you. They put her through to me. Lacey hung up and ran into Rick's office. I'm sorry I couldn't get back to you last night, Isabel. That's all right, Lacey. I shouldn't talk about all this over the phone anyhow. Are you bringing anyone in today? No one is lined up so far. As she said that, Rick slid a note across his desk to her. Curtis Caldwell, a lawyer with Keller, Rowland, and Smythe, is being transferred here next month from Texas. Wants a one-bedroom apartment between 65th and 72nd on 5th. Can look at it today. Lacey mouthed a thank you to Rick and said to Isabel, Maybe I will be bringing someone by. Keep your fingers crossed. I don't know why, but I've got a hunch this could be our sale. Patrick the doorman spoke to Lacey as she alighted from the cab. A Mr. Caldwell's waiting for you, Miss Farrell. Through the ornate glass door, Lacey spotted a slender man in his mid-40s drumming his fingers on the lobby table. She realized that she was bracing herself to be told that he didn't like to be kept waiting. But when she introduced herself to Curtis Caldwell, a smile brightened his face. When Lacey had phoned Isabel Waring to confirm the time of the appointment, the older woman, sounding distracted, had told her she would be busy in the library, so Lacey should just let herself in with her realtor's key. Lacey had the key in hand when she and Caldwell stepped off the elevator. She opened the door. It's me, Isabel. Lacey went to the library, Caldwell behind her. Isabel was at the desk in the small room, her back to the door. A leather loose-leaf binder lay open at one side. Some of its pages were spread across the desk. Just forget I'm here, please. As Lacey showed Caldwell around, he clearly liked the apartment and did not show any resistance to the $600,000 asking price. I don't haggle, Miss Farrell. I'm willing to pay the asking price, provided I absolutely can move in the first of the month. Lacey tried not to show her astonishment at the offer. Suppose we talk to Mrs. Waring. Isabel Waring did not answer Lacey's knocks at the library door. Lacey turned to the prospective buyer. Mr. Caldwell, if you don't mind waiting for me just a moment in the living room, I'll have a little talk with Mrs. Waring and be right out. Lacey opened the door and looked in. Isabel Waring was still sitting at the desk, but her head was bowed. Go away, Lacey. I can't deal with this now. Isabel, this is very important. We have an offer on the apartment. Forget it. I'm not going to sell. I need more time here. Lacey, I just don't want to talk now. Come back later. Lacey checked her watch. I'll come back at 7. She closed the door and turned. Curtis Caldwell was standing in the foyer between the library and the living room. Why don't we go downstairs? They sat in the lobby for a few minutes as she told Caldwell that Isabel didn't want to sell. I'm sure it will be all right, Mr. Caldwell. I'll come back and talk to her this evening. Give me a number where I can call you later. I'm staying at the Waldorf Towers. They stood to go. Don't worry, this will work out fine. You'll see. His smile was affable, confident. I'm sure it will. I leave it in your hands, Miss Farrell. He left the apartment building and went immediately to the public phones. When he had reached his party, he said, You were right. She's found the journal. It's in the leather binder the way you described it. She's also apparently changed her mind about selling the apartment. He listened, then said, I'll take care of it. He hung up. Then Sandy Savarano, the man who called himself Curtis Caldwell, went into a nearby bar and ordered a scotch. Her fingers crossed, Lacey phoned Isabel Waring at 6 o'clock. She was relieved to find that the woman now was calm. Come over, Lacey. There's something in Heather's journal that I think could prove to be very significant. Just let yourself in. I'll be upstairs in the sitting room. I'll be there at 7. Rick Parker, who was passing by Lacey's office, saw the troubled expression on her face. Problem? She told him of Isabel Waring's erratic behavior and about the possibility of losing the potential sale. Can you talk her out of changing her mind? She got up and reached for her jacket. We'll see what happens. You're leaving already? I thought you said you were meeting her at 7. I'll walk over there, I think, probably stop for a cup of coffee along the way. Marshal my arguments. See you, Rick. She was still 20 minutes early, but decided to go up anyway. As she opened the door and called Isabel's name, she heard the scream and the shot. For a split second she froze, then sheer instinct made her slam the door and step into the closet before Caldwell came rushing down the stairs and out into the corridor, a pistol in one hand, a leather binder under his arm. She leaned against the door, hearing the lock click as he tried to get back into the apartment. She stumbled up the winding staircase, then through the ivory and peach sitting room and into the bedroom, where Isabel was lying across the bed. There was so much blood spreading now to the floor. Isabel was moving, pulling at a sheaf of papers that were under a pillow. The blood was on them, too. Lacey wanted to tell Isabel that she would get help, that it would be all right, but Isabel began to try to speak. Lacey, give Heather's journal to her father. Only to him. Swear that. Only to him. You read it. Show him where. Her voice trailed off. Her eyes were becoming unfocused. Lacey knelt next to her. With the last of her strength, Isabel squeezed Lacey's hand. Swear. Please. Man. I do, Isabel, I do. Suddenly the pressure on her hand was gone. She knew that Isabel was dead. Lacey was now in the library of Isabel's apartment, seated in a leather chair facing the desk where Isabel had been seated just a few hours ago, reading the contents of the leather binder. Curtis Caldwell had been carrying that binder. The pages she had picked up in Isabel's room were in Lacey's briefcase now. Isabel had made her swear to give them only to Heather's father. But shouldn't she tell the police about them? Lacey, drink some coffee. You need it. Rick was crouching beside her, holding a steaming cup out to her. He had already explained to the detectives that he had no reason to question a phone call from a man claiming to be an attorney with Keller, Rowland & Smythe, an attorney transferring to New York from Texas. Rick had explained they did a lot of business with the firm, and he saw no reason to call and confirm. An edge of impatience crept into the voice of Ed Sloan, the older of the two detectives questioning Lacey. Miss Farrell, you're sure this Caldwell guy is the one you saw running out of here? I'm absolutely sure it was the same man. He was carrying a pistol and a leather binder. Mentally, she gave herself a hard slap. She hadn't meant to talk about the journal. The leather binder? What leather binder? That's the first you've mentioned it. Lacey sighed. I really don't know. It was open on Isabel's desk this afternoon. She should tell them about the pages that weren't inside the leather binder when Caldwell took it, but she'd sworn to Isabel that she would give them to Heather's father. Suddenly, Lacey felt her legs begin to shake. "I just want to go home. Please, let me go home." Suddenly, Rick was saying something to the detective in a low voice, something she couldn't hear. She rubbed her hands together. Her fingers were sticky. She looked down, then gasped. She hadn't realized that her hands were sticky with Isabel's blood. Detective Sloane nodded to Lacey. "Mr. Parker is going to take you home, Miss Farrell. We'll talk to you more tomorrow, when you've rested." Lacey felt Rick's hands under her arms, urging her to stand. Obediently, she got up, allowed him to guide her through the door, then down the foyer. Suddenly, she remembered her briefcase. That's where the pages from the journal were. She remembered the feel of the pages in her hand, crumpled, blood-soaked. That's where the blood came from. Detective Sloane had asked her if she had touched Isabel. She had told him that she had held Isabel's hand as she died. There must be blood on her briefcase, too. Lacey had a sudden moment of total clarity. If she asked Rick to get it to her from the closet, he would notice the blood on the handle. She had to get it herself and keep them from seeing it until she could wipe it clean. They were passing the closet where she had put her briefcase. Breaking away, she opened the closet door and grabbed her briefcase in her left hand. Rick reached for it. "I'll carry it." Deliberately, she sagged against him, weighing down his arm with her right hand, making him support her, tightening her grip on the handle of her briefcase. "Lacey, I'll get you home." She felt as though everyone's eyes were staring at her, staring at the bloody briefcase. Was this the way a thief felt? She wondered. "Go back, give them the journal. It's not yours to take," a voice inside her insisted. Isabel's blood was on those pages. It's not mine to give, either, she thought hopelessly. Lacey's apartment was on East End Avenue at 79th Street. When they arrived there, Rick wanted to come upstairs with her, but she demurred. "Rick, I just want to go to bed." She showered, then made herself a hot toddy. As she sipped the drink in bed, she felt a calmness begin to settle over her and fell asleep as soon as she turned off the light. And almost immediately awakened with a shriek. She was opening the door to Isabel Waring's apartment. She was bending over the dead woman's body. Curtis Caldwell was aiming the pistol at her head. It took her several moments to realize that the shrill sound was the ringing of the telephone. Still shaking, she picked up the receiver. It was Jay, her brother-in-law. "We just got back from dinner and heard on the news that Isabel Waring was shot. They reported that there was a witness, a young woman who could identify the killer. Lacey, it wasn't you, I hope." "Yes, it was me." For a moment there was silence. Then he said quietly, "Lacey, it's never good to be a witness." "Well, I certainly never wanted to be one." "Kit wants to talk to you." "I can't talk now. Kit will understand." She hung up the phone and lay in the darkness, calming herself, willing herself to go back to sleep, realizing that her ears were straining to hear another scream, followed by the sound of footsteps racing toward her. Caldwell's footsteps. Her last thought as she drifted off to sleep was of something Jay had said in his call. He said it was never good to be a witness. Why did he say that? When he had left Lacey in the lobby of her apartment building, Rick Parker had taken a taxi directly to his place on Central Park West and 67th Street. He knew what would be awaiting him there, and he dreaded it. By now, Isabel Waring's death would be all over the news. As he had expected, when he entered his dark apartment, he could see that the light on his telephone answering machine was flashing. There was one message. It was from his father. "No matter what time it is, call me when you get in." His father answered on the first ring, and Rick said, "Before you ask, I had no choice. I had to go over there because Lacey had told the police that I'd been the one who'd given her Caldwell's number, so they sent for me." Rick listened for a minute to his father's angry voice. Then he finally managed to break in to respond. Dad, I've told you not to worry. It's all fine. Nobody knows that I was involved with Heather Landy. Sandy Severano, the man known to Lacey as Curtis Caldwell, had raced from Isabel Waring's apartment and down the fire stairs to the basement and out through the delivery entrance. It was risky, but sometimes you had to take risks. He took a taxi to the small hotel on 29th Street where he was staying. Once in his room, he tossed the binder on the bed and promptly poured a generous amount of scotch into a water glass. Up until the last-minute glitch, the job had been easy enough. He had gotten back into the building undetected when the doorman was at the curb helping an old woman into a cab. He had let himself into the apartment with the key he had taken off the table in the foyer when Lacey Farrell was in the library with the Waring woman. He had found Isabel in the master bedroom. The leather binder had been on the night table beside the bed. She hadn't started screaming. No, she'd been too scared. That was what he liked most. The naked fear in her eyes, the awareness that she was going to die. He pictured Isabel as she started shrinking away from him, returning to the bed, her back to the headboard. Then finally the single scream, "Don't!" mingling suddenly with the sound of someone calling her from downstairs, just as he shot her. Severano drummed his fingers angrily on the leather binder. The Farrell woman had come in at that precise second. He had been a fool letting her lock him out, forcing him to run away. But he did get the journal, and he did kill the Waring woman. And if Farrell became a problem, he would kill her too. It was all part of the job. Carefully, Severano unzipped the leather binder and looked inside. The pages were all neatly clamped in place, but when he thumbed through them, he found they were all blank. He realized the actual journal pages must still be in the apartment. It was too late to get them now. The cops would be swarming all over. He'd have to find another way to get them. But it wasn't too late to make sure that Lacey Farrell never got the chance to ID him in court. That was a chore he might actually enjoy. Sometime near dawn, Lacey fell into a heavy, dream-filled sleep, in which shadows moved slowly down long corridors and terrified screams came relentlessly from behind locked doors. It was a relief to wake up at 7:15, even though she dreaded what she knew the day would bring. Detective Sloane had said he would want her to go to headquarters and work with an artist to come up with a composite sketch of Curtis Caldwell. But as she sat wrapped in her robe, sipping coffee, she turned and looked. Her briefcase was still there, under the couch, the briefcase in which she had hidden the blood-stained pages. Isabel thought there was something in it that proved Heather's death was not an accident. Curtis Caldwell stole the leather binder after he killed Isabel. I have to turn them over to the police, Lacey thought, but I believe I know a way I can do it and still keep my promise to Isabel. At 2:00, Lacey was in a small office in the police station, sitting across a conference table from Detective Ed Sloane and his assistant, Detective Nick Mars. Detective Sloane seemed to be a little short of breath, as though he had been hurrying. Nick Mars was another story. He was still in his 20s, baby-faced with full cheeks, innocent blue eyes, and he was nice. She was sure that he was being set up as the good guy in the good guy, bad guy scenario interrogators play. Sloane would bluster and occasionally rage. Nick Mars would soothe, his manner always calm, solicitous. Lacey had been at the station for almost 3 hours. As she was trying to describe Curtis Caldwell's face to the police artist, Sloane was clearly annoyed that she couldn't be more specific. After the artist had failed to come up with a sketch she felt resembled the man she had seen, Lacey had been shown endless mugshots. However, none of them resembled the man she knew as Curtis Caldwell, another fact that clearly upset Sloane. Now, Sloane finally pulled out a cigarette and lit up. "Okay, Ms. Farrell, I'd just like to review a few things about this crime. I'd say you were virtually in shock when we talked with you after we got there." "I guess I was." I didn't escort you to the door when you left, but I understand that you had the presence of mind to remember that you'd left your briefcase in the hall closet next to the door of the Waring apartment. I remembered it as I passed the closet, yes. Do you remember that the photographers were taking pictures at that time? Yes, I do. Would you look at this picture then, please? Detective Mars picked up this little detail. Lacey stared at the picture. It showed her in profile, gripping her briefcase, holding it away from Rick Parker as he reached for it. So you not only remembered to get your briefcase, but you insisted on carrying it yourself. Well, I probably was acting on automatic pilot. I really don't remember what was in my head. No, Miss Farrell, I think you do. You see, there were traces of blood in that closet, Isabel Waring's blood. Now, how would it have gotten there, do you suppose? Heather's journal, Lacey thought. The blood-stained loose-leaf pages. I should say something, but what? Sloane leaned across the desk. Miss Farrell, I don't know what your game is, or what you're not telling us, but clearly this was no ordinary murder. The whole crime was carefully planned and executed. Your appearance on the scene was the only thing that probably did not go according to plan. Sloane shoved a sheet of paper across the table. Miss Farrell, have you ever seen this before? Lacey looked at it. It was a loose-leaf page, covered with writing. She skimmed it. It was dated 3 years earlier. It began, Baba came to see the show again, took all of us back to the restaurant for dinner. Heather's journal, she thought. I must have missed this page. Miss Farrell, have you ever seen this before? Yesterday afternoon, when I brought the man I know as Curtis Caldwell to see the apartment, Isabel was in the library, seated at the desk. The leather binder was open, and she was reading loose-leaf pages that she'd taken out of it. I can't be positive that this is one of them, but it probably is. At least that much is true, she thought. Suddenly, she regretted not taking time this morning to make copies of the journal before going to the station. That was what she had decided to do, give the original to the police, a copy to Jimmy Landy, and keep a copy for herself. Let's get back to the smear of Isabel Waring's blood we found in the downstairs closet. Do you have any idea how that got there? I had Isabel's blood on my hands, you know that. Oh, yes, I know that, Miss Farrell, but your hands weren't dripping with blood when you grabbed that briefcase of yours as you were leaving last night. Were there perhaps more pages like the one you just read scattered around her room? Mars interrupted. Take it easy, Eddie. Give Lacey a chance to answer. Lacey can have all the time she wants, Nick, but the truth is going to be the same. She took something from that room, I'm sure of it. And don't you wonder why an innocent bystander would take something like that from the victim's home? Can you guess why, Ms. Farrell? She stood up. No, I can't. Are you finished with me, Detective Sloane? For today I am, Miss Farrell, yes. But one other thing. If you did take any part of that journal, I have to wonder just how innocent a bystander you were. Lacey left without responding. Tomorrow she would turn over the original to Sloane and try to make him understand why she took it. She started to hail a cab, then decided to walk home. The mid-afternoon sun felt good. As she crossed 2nd Avenue, she sensed someone close behind her and spun around quickly to meet the puzzled eyes of an elderly man. She darted to the curb. She'd expected to see Curtis Caldwell. If the journal was what he was after, then he didn't get it. Until the police caught Caldwell, she was in danger. She was certain of that. The lobby of her building felt like a sanctuary, but when Lacey got off at her floor, the long corridor seemed frightening, and key in hand, she hurried to the apartment and quickly dashed inside. I'll never carry this briefcase again, she vowed as she retrieved it from under the couch and carried it into the bedroom and set it on her desk, carefully avoiding touching the bloody handle. Gingerly, she removed the journal pages from the briefcase. Finally, she put them all in a manila envelope and fished around in her closet for a tote bag. 10 minutes later, that bag firmly under her arm, she stepped out onto the street. As she nervously hailed a cab, she tried to convince herself that whoever Caldwell was, and for whatever reason he had killed Isabel, He must surely be miles away by now, on the run. Sandy Savarano, alias Curtis Caldwell, was taking no chances of being recognized as he used a payphone down the block from Lacey Farrell's apartment building. He wore a gray wig over his sandy hair. There was a graying stubble covering his cheeks and chin, and his lawyer's suit had been replaced by a shapeless sweater worn over faded jeans. When Farrell left the police station, she walked home and went inside. "I'm not going to hang around. There's a squad car parked across from her building. It may be there to keep an eye on her." But he decided to watch the police car for a while as a test of his theory that the policeman had been assigned to guard Lacey Farrell. He didn't have to wait long. He watched from a half a block away as the familiar figure of a young woman in a black suit carrying a tote bag emerged from the building and hailed a cab. As it sped away, he looked to see what the cops in the squad car would do. Nothing. A moment later, a car ran the red light at the corner, and the flashing lights on the roof of the squad car went on as it leaped from the curb. Good, he thought. That's one less thing to get in my way. After they returned to the restaurant from making arrangements for Isabel's cremation, Jimmy Landy and Steve Abbott went directly to Jimmy's office. Steve poured liberal amounts of scotch into tumblers and placed one of them on Landy's desk. "I think we both need this." Landy reached for the glass. "I know I do. This has been an awful day. It doesn't make sense, does it, Steve? Some guy claims he's looking to buy an apartment, then comes back and kills Isabel. I told her she had to get rid of the apartment. Her going on and on about Heather's death, and then she gets killed. Well, she's with Heather now. Maybe that's where she wanted to be." In an obvious effort to change the subject, Abbott cleared his throat. "Jimmy, Cynthia is coming over around 10 for dinner. How about joining us?" Landy shook his head. "No, but thanks. I appreciate it. You've been wet nursing me for almost a year, Steve, ever since Heather died, but it can't go on. Stop worrying about me and pay attention to your girlfriend. Are you going to marry her?" Abbott smiled. "I'm not rushing into anything. 2 divorces are enough." Abbott left, and shortly after, the receptionist buzzed Jimmy. "Mr. Landy, a Miss Farrell wants to talk to you. She says to tell you she's the realtor who was working with Mrs. Waring." Lacey had waited until everyone in the domestic real estate division had left before carrying the tote bag to the copier, where she'd made 2 copies of Heather's journal. One for Heather's father, one for herself. Then she'd placed a call to Landy's restaurant. The conversation was brief. Jimmy Landy would be waiting for her. At the restaurant, she could see that the dining room was full and the bar jammed. As soon as she gave her name, the receptionist signaled the maitre d', who came over to her. "Mr. Landy is waiting for you upstairs, Miss Farrell." When she was in his office, sitting opposite the brooding, solid-looking man, Lacey felt as though she were firing at a wounded target. Even so, she felt she had to be straightforward in telling him Isabel Waring's dying words. "I promised to give the journal to you, and I promised to read it myself. I don't know why Isabel wanted me to read it. Her exact words were, 'Show him where.' For some reason, she thought I'd find whatever it was that apparently confirmed her suspicion that your daughter's death was not a simple accident." She opened her tote bag and took out the set of pages she had brought with her. Landy glanced at them, then turned away. "These aren't the originals." "I don't have the original pages with me. I'm giving them to the police in the morning." His face flushed with sudden anger. "That's not what Isabel asked you to do." Lacey stood up. "Mr. Landy, I don't have a choice. Surely you understand that it's going to take a lot of explaining to the police to make them understand why I removed evidence from a murder scene. I'm afraid you'll have to make do with a copy." He did not even look up as she walked out. When Lacey arrived at her apartment, she turned on the entrance light and had taken several steps inside before the chaos in front of her registered. Drawers had been spilled, closets ransacked, furniture cushions had been tossed on the floor. Even the refrigerator had been emptied and left open. Appalled and terrified, she stared at the mess, then stumbled through the debris to call the superintendent. While he dialed 911, she put in a call to Detective Sloane. He arrived shortly after the local precinct cops. "You know what they were looking for, don't you?" "Yes, I do. Heather Landy's journal. But it's not here. It's in my office. I hope whoever did this hasn't gone there." In the squad car on the way to her office, Detective Sloane read Lacey her rights. Lacey protested to him. "I was keeping the promise I made to a dying woman. She asked me to read the journal and then give it to Heather Landy's father, and that's what I've done. I took him a copy this evening." When they got to her office, Sloane did not leave her side as she unlocked the cabinet and reached for the manila envelope in which she had placed the original pages of the journal. He opened the clasp, pulled out a few of the sheets, studied them, then looked at her. "We'd better go down to headquarters, Miss Farrell. We need to talk about this whole thing a bit more." When they reached the precinct station, Sloane began. "All right. Let's talk about how Curtis Caldwell got back into the Waring apartment. There was no sign of forced entry. Did you give him a key?" "No, of course not. But wait a minute. Isabel always left a key in a bowl on the table in the foyer. She told me she did it so that if she ran downstairs for her mail, she didn't have to bother with her key ring. Caldwell could have seen it there and taken it. But what about my apartment? How did someone get in there? I have a doorman." Sloane almost smiled. "These so-called secured buildings are a joke, Miss Farrell. You're in the realty business, you know that." Lacey thought of Curtis Caldwell, pistol in hand, rushing to find her, wanting to kill her. She realized she was fighting tears. "Please, I want to go home." For a moment she thought that they might keep her there longer, but then Sloane got up. "Okay, you can go now, Miss Farrell. But I must warn you that formal charges may be pending against you for removing and concealing evidence from a crime scene." I should have talked to a lawyer, Lacey thought. How could I have been such a fool? Ramon Garcia, the building superintendent, and his wife Sonia were in the process of straightening up Lacey's apartment when she arrived. Ramon had just completed replacing the lock. This was taken apart by an expert. Sonia saw that Lacey was tired. "I'll come back tomorrow morning, don't worry. When you get home from work, everything will be ship-shape." Lacey walked with them to the door and asked Ramon, "Does the deadbolt still work?" He tried it. "No one's going to get in while that's on, at least without a battering ram. You're safe." She closed and locked the door behind them. What have I gotten myself into? The next morning, when she reached Parker & Parker, she was summoned to Richard Parker Sr.'s office. Rick was in with his father. The elder Parker did not mince words. "Lacey, according to security, you came in here last night with a detective. What was that all about?" She told him as simply as she could, explaining that she had decided she had to turn the journal over to the police, but first she needed to make a copy for Heather's father. Parker raised an eyebrow. "You kept concealed evidence in this office?" "I intended to give it to Detective Sloane today. I was only trying to do what Isabel Waring asked me to do. I wasn't thinking straight. Look, I'm sorry about this." "I'm sorry about it, too. Have you any appointments today?" "2 this afternoon." "Liz or Andrew can handle them for you. Rick, see to it. Lacey, you plan on working the phones for the immediate future." She was suddenly angry. "That's not fair. Nor is it fair to drag this firm into a murder investigation, Miss Farrell." As soon as she got to her desk, one of the new secretaries, Grace McMahon, came over with a cup of coffee and handed it to her. Lacey looked up to thank her, then strained to hear as Grace tried to tell her something without being overheard. "I got in early today. There was a detective here talking with Mr. Parker. I couldn't tell what he was saying, but I did hear that it had something to do with you." Ed Sloane was fond of saying that good detective work began with a hunch. After 25 years on the force, he had ample proof, for many of his hunches had turned out to be correct. That was why he expounded his theories to Nick Mars as they studied the loose-leaf pages that comprised Heather Landy's journal. "I say that Lacey Farrell still isn't coming clean with us. She's more involved in this thing than she's letting on. We know she took the journal out of the apartment. We know she made a copy of it to give to Jimmy Landy." An hour later, Sloane received a call from a specialist in the latent print unit. They'd run a fingerprint that had been lifted from the outer door of Lacey's apartment. It was a match with the fingerprint of Sandy Severano, a low-level mobster who had been a suspect in a dozen drug-related murders. Sloane was incredulous. "Sandy Severano? That's crazy. Severano's boat blew up with him in it 2 years ago. We covered his funeral in Woodlawn Cemetery." "We covered someone's funeral," the print specialist said. "Dead men don't break into apartments." For the rest of the day, Lacey watched helplessly as clients she had developed were assigned to other agents. She was also made uncomfortable by the feeling of being watched. Rick was constantly in and out of the sales area where her cubicle was located. She had a hunch that by the end of the day she would be told to stay away from the office until the investigation was concluded. So if she was going to take the copy of Heather's journal with her, she would have to get it out of her desk when Rick wasn't looking. She finally got her chance to retrieve the pages at 10 minutes of 5 when Rick was called into his father's office. She had barely managed to slip the manila envelope into her briefcase when Richard Parker Sr. summoned her to his office and told her she was being suspended. The full impact of everything that was happening hit Lacey when she arrived home at 5:30 and realized that for practical purposes she was out of a job. Lacey's thoughts raced. Why would he even want to get rid of me? His own son gave me Curtis Caldwell's name and told me to set up an appointment. And I bet he's not planning to give me any of the severance due after so many years of employment. I need to talk to a lawyer. But who? A name came to her mind, Jack Regan. He and his wife Margaret, a couple in their mid-50s, lived on the 15th floor of her building. She told herself, the worst thing that can happen is that they'll slam the door in my face. Their surprise at seeing her gave way to a genuinely warm welcome. They were having a pre-dinner sherry and insisted she join them. They had heard about the burglary. Lacey left an hour later, having retained Regan to represent her in the likely event that she was facing indictment for holding on to the journal pages. A short time later, she was in her car and heading to New Jersey for dinner with Kit and her family. Her mother and Alex Carbine would also be there, and Lacey was an hour late. As she drove along Route 4, she debated how much she would tell them about what was going on. She finally decided, everything. If Mom or Kit called her at the office and she was not there, they'd have to know why. She glanced in her rearview mirror. Was that car following her? Stop it, she warned herself. You're getting paranoid. Kit and Jay lived on a quiet street in a section of pricey homes. Lacey pulled up to the curb in front of their house, got out of the car, and started up the walk. Bonnie ran for the door. "Lacey's here!" "About time," Jay grunted. "Thank God," Mona Farrell murmured. Mona knew that despite Alex Carbine's presence, Jay was about to explode with irritation. Bonnie tugged at the door and opened it. As she raised her arms for Lacey's hug, there was the sound of shots and bullets whistled past them. A flash of pain coursed through her head, and Lacey threw herself forward, her body covering Bonnie's. In the sudden quiet that followed the shots, she quickly ran a mental check of the situation. The pain she felt was real, but she realized with a stab of anguish that the gush of blood against her neck was coming from the small body of her niece. In the waiting room on the pediatrics floor of Hackensack Medical Center, a doctor smiled reassuringly at Lacey. Bonnie had a close call, but she'll make it, and she's very insistent, Miss Farrell, that she wants to see you." My fault. It was all Lacey could think. She was only vaguely aware of the headache caused by the bullet that had creased her skull. In fact, her whole mind and body seemed numb, floating in a kind of unreality, not yet fully comprehending the horror of all that was happening. In her niece's room, Lacey found Jay and Kit sitting on either side of the crib. Bonnie's shoulder and upper arm were heavily bandaged. In a sleepy voice, she was protesting. "I'm not a baby. I don't want to be in a crib." Then she spotted Lacey, and her face brightened. Lacey tried to smile. "Snazzy-looking bandage, girlfriend. Where do I sign it?" Bonnie smiled back, her eyelids drooping. Lacey leaned down and kissed her cheek. "Come back tomorrow, please, Lacey." "I have some stuff to do first, Bonnie, but I'll be back real soon." Back in the waiting room, Lacey found detectives from the Bergen County Prosecutor's Office waiting for her. "We've been contacted by New York, the U.S. Attorney's Office, Miss Farrell. We've been asked to see that you get home safely." Gary Baldwin, United States Attorney for the Southern District of the state, generally wore a benign expression that seemed incongruous to anyone who had ever seen him in action at a trial. Rimless glasses enhanced the scholarly look of his thin face. 43 years old, he was known to have national political ambitions and clearly would like to crown his career in the U.S. Attorney's Office with a major headline-grabbing case. That case might have just landed in his lap. It certainly had all the proper ingredients. A young woman happens on a murder scene in an apartment on Manhattan's expensive Upper East Side. The victim, the ex-wife of a prominent restaurateur. Most important, the woman has seen the assailant and can identify him. Baldwin knew that if Sandy Savarano had come out of hiding to do this job, it had to be tied to drugs. Thought to be dead for the past 2 years, Savarano had made a career of being an enforcer who eliminated anyone who got in the way of the drug cartel he worked for. But when the police had shown Lacey Farrell the mugshots they had of Savarano, she had not recognized him. Either her memory was faulty, or Savarano had had enough plastic surgery to successfully disguise his identity. Gary Baldwin's dream was to arrest and prosecute Savarano, or better yet, get him to plea bargain and give evidence against the real bosses. But the call he had just received from Detective Eddie Sloan had infuriated him. The journal that seemed to be a key part of this case had been stolen from the precinct. Sloan had explained. "I was keeping it in my cubby in the squad room, locked, of course, while Nick Mars and I read it to see if there was anything useful in it. It disappeared sometime last night." Then Sloan had added, "Jimmy Landy has the copy Farrell gave him. I'm on my way to get it from him." "Detective, make sure you get it before that disappears, too." Baldwin slammed the phone down. Lacey Farrell was due in his office, and he had a lot of questions for her. Jack Regan had joined Lacey in the waiting room outside the U.S. Attorney's office. He gave her a reassuring smile when a secretary said they could go in. Baldwin did not mince words. "Ms. Farrell, I am very sorry for the problems you've been having, but the fact is you seriously impaired a major criminal investigation by removing evidence from a crime scene. For all we know, you may have destroyed some of that evidence." Jack Regan snapped, "You have no right to accuse my client." Baldwin held up his hand for silence. "Ms. Farrell, the man you know as Curtis Caldwell is a ruthless killer. We need your testimony to help convict him, and we intend to make sure that nothing happens to prevent that." He paused and stared at her. "Ms. Farrell, it is within my power to hold you as a material witness. I promise you it won't be pleasant. It would mean that you be kept under 24-hour guard in a special facility." "How long a time are you talking about?" "We don't know, Ms. Farrell. It would be however long it takes to apprehend and, with your help, convict the murderer." Lacey had the sudden sense of being in a car hurtling down a steep hill about to crash. "Would I be safe after I testify against him?" Jack Regan shook his head. No, you wouldn't be. Baldwin continued. On the contrary, he's claustrophobic. He will do anything to avoid going to prison. Now that we can link him to a murder, he may well be persuaded to turn state evidence once we've got him, in which case we would not even bring him to trial. But until that happens, we must keep you safe, Miss Farrell. He paused. Have you ever heard of the Witness Protection Program? In the quiet of his locked office, a man studied Heather's journal again. It was in there all right, but he had taken care of the problem. The cops were following up all the names they had. Good luck to them. They were on a wild goose chase. Finally, he turned the pages over. The blood on them had dried a long time ago, probably just minutes after it had been shed. Even so, his hands felt sticky. He wiped them with his handkerchief. Lacey Farrell had not been seen for 3 months. They were either holding her as a material witness, or she had disappeared into the Witness Protection Program. She supposedly had made one copy of the journal for Jimmy Landy, but what would have stopped her from making another copy for herself? Nothing. Wherever she was, she would have figured out that the journal was worth killing for. Isabel must have talked her head off to Farrell. God knows what she had said. Sandy Severano had been careless. Twice. He had let Farrell see him at Waring's apartment at the time of the murder, and now she could identify him. Then he had left a fingerprint at Farrell's apartment that tied him to the burglary. Sandy would give everything up in a minute rather than go to prison. Farrell had to be tracked down and Severano sent to eliminate her. Then, just maybe, he would be safe at last. The name on the bell at the small apartment building on Hennepin Avenue in Minneapolis was Alice Carroll. To the neighbors, she was an attractive young woman in her late 20s who didn't have a job and kept pretty much to herself. Lacey knew that was the way they described her. And they're right about keeping to myself, she thought. After 3 months, the sensation of sleepwalking was ending and an intense sense of isolation setting in. I didn't have a choice, she reminded herself. Kit and her mother had come to help her pack and to say goodbye. They all thought of it as temporary, a kind of forced vacation. Then it had happened quickly and efficiently. 2 uniformed cops had taken her out in a squad car as though she were going to the precinct for questioning. Her bags were brought down to the garage where an unmarked van was parked. Then she was transferred to an armored van that took her to what they called a safe site, an orientation center in the Washington, D.C. area. Alice in Wonderland, Lacey would think, as she passed the time in that enclosure, watching her identity disappear. In those weeks, she worked with an instructor to create a new background for herself. Her only reality became her new identity. Her instructor had walked her to a mirror. Look in here, Lacey. You see that young woman? Everything you think you know about her isn't so. Just forget her. Forget all about her. It'll be rough for a while. You'll feel like you are playing some kind of game, pretending. That was when Lacey had chosen her new name, Alice Carroll, after Alice's Adventures in Wonderland by Lewis Carroll. It fit her situation perfectly. The key word in this program is security, Lacey thought as she started a letter to her mother. What do you write about? Not about the weather. It would be a dead giveaway that I'm in Minnesota. I can't write about a job because I don't have one yet. I can say that my fake birth certificate and my fake Social Security card just came through, so now I can look for a job. She was allowed to call home once a week on a secure telephone hookup. The last call she had made, she could hear Jay in the background hurrying Kit. Well, it was a pain in the neck to have to sit and wait for a call at a specific time. She couldn't deny that. And no one could call her back. Finally, she wrote, "It sounds as though the holidays were fun for the kids, and I'm so happy that Bonnie's arm is getting stronger. Take care of yourself, Mom. Sounds as though you and Alex are having fun. I'll never forget how helpful he was that awful night while Bonnie was in surgery." Love you all. Keep praying that they find and arrest Isabel Waring's murderer, and he plea bargains, and I get off the hook." Lacey signed her name, folded the letter, and put it in an envelope. Deputy Marshal Svensson would mail it for her through the secure mail forwarding channel. For lack of something else to do, she reached into the bottom drawer of her desk and pulled out the copy she had made of Heather Landy's journal. What could Isabel possibly have wanted me to see in it? Some of the entries were in a close sequence, daily and sometimes several times a day. Others were spaced a week, a month, or as much as 6 weeks apart. In all, the journal spanned the 4 years Heather spent in New York. She wrote in detail about looking for an apartment, about her father insisting she live in a safe building on the East Side. Heather clearly had preferred Manhattan's West Side. As she put it, it isn't stuffy and has life. She wrote about singing lessons, about auditioning and getting her first part in a New York production, a revival of The Boyfriend. Lacey got the clear impression that Heather had been pretty much held down by both her mother and father until, after 2 years of college, she opted to come to New York and try for a career in the theater. It was obvious that she had been close to both parents. All the references to them were warm and loving, even though several times she had complained about the need to please her father. It was clear from the last few entries that Heather was deeply troubled about something. She wrote several times about being caught between a rock and a hard place. "I don't know what to do." Unlike the others, those last entries were on unlined paper. There was nothing specific in those entries, but obviously they had triggered Isabel Waring's suspicions. Lacey put the pages back in the drawer. God knows I'm between a rock and a hard place right now. Feeling restless, she turned on the radio. It was set on the AM band, and a voice was saying, "Hi, I'm Tom Lynch, your host for the next 4 hours on WCIV." Tom Lynch? Lacey was shocked out of her homesickness. She had made a list of all the names mentioned in Heather Landy's journal, and one of them was Tom Lynch, an out-of-town broadcaster on whom it seemed Heather had once had a mild crush. Was it the same person? And if so, was it possible Lacey could learn something about Heather from him? Tom Lynch was a hardy Midwesterner. Raised in North Dakota, he was one of the breed of stalwarts who thought 20 degrees was a bracing temperature and believed that only sissies complained about the cold. Marge Peterson, the receptionist at Minneapolis radio station WCIV, looked at Tom with maternal affection. He certainly brightened her day, and since he had taken over the station's afternoon talk show, he apparently had been having the same effect on many other people in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area. Marge was happy at his success, but realized that it was a double-edged sword. She knew that several other stations had tried to hire him away, but he had announced his strategy was to build WCIV into the #1 station in the listening area before considering moving on. And now it's happening, she thought with a sigh, and soon we'll be losing him. Tom came over to her desk. "Marge, anything wrong? You look worried." She laughed and shook her head. "Nothing wrong at all. You're off to the gym?" "You bet. See you later." As Lynch was signing off that afternoon, he had told his listeners that since even a penguin couldn't jog outside in this weather, he would be heading off to the Twin Cities gym later on, and he hoped to see some of them there. Twin Cities was one of his sponsors. As Lacey filled out the membership form for the Twin Cities gym, Ruth Wilcox asked, "How'd you hear about us, Miss Carroll?" "On the Tom Lynch program. I've been thinking of joining a gym for some time, and since I can try this one out a few times before deciding." "At least this will give me some practice in trying to get a job," she told herself fiercely. On the drive to the gym, she had mentally reviewed the details. She was Alice Carroll from Hartford, Connecticut, a graduate of Caldwell College, a safe alma mater because the school was now closed. She had worked as a secretary in a doctor's office in Hartford. The doctor retired at the same time that she broke up with her boyfriend, so it just seemed like the right time to make a move. She had chosen Minneapolis because she visited there once as a teenager and loved it. She was an only child, her father was dead, and her mother had remarried and was living in London. Lacey signed Alice Carroll to the form and pushed it across the desk. Wilcox studied it. Perfect. Now, let me show you around. It gets fairly crowded early in the morning and right after work. Oh, look, there he is. She called out to a broad-shouldered man who was headed away from them and toward the men's locker room. Tom, come here a minute. He stopped and turned. A moment later, she was introducing them. Tom Lynch, this is Alice Carroll. Alice is joining us because she heard you talk about us on your radio program. He smiled easily. I'm glad I'm so persuasive. Nice to meet you, Alice. With a quick nod and another bright smile, he left them. Wilcox was beaming. Isn't he a doll? If I didn't have a boyfriend, well, never mind that. The trouble is the single women sometimes come on too strong to him, keep trying to talk to him. But when he's here to exercise. So am I, Lacey said, hoping she sounded convincing. Lacey began going to the gym daily, always in the late afternoon. The exercise felt good, and it gave her a chance to focus her thoughts as well. Now that she had the Social Security card, she was anxious to get a job, but Deputy Marshal Svensson told her the protection program would not provide false references. How am I supposed to get a job without a reference? We suggest you volunteer to work without pay for a couple of weeks, then see if you're hired. Being alone so much, the time was passing too slowly, and Lacey could feel depression settling over her like a heavy blanket. She had even come to dread the weekly talk with her mother. It always ended the same way, with her mother in tears, and Lacey ready to scream with frustration. In the first few days after she started going to the gym, she had managed to make something of a friend of Ruth Wilcox. It was to her that she first tried out the story of what had happened to bring her to Minneapolis. Her mother had remarried and moved to London, the doctor she worked for retired, and Lacey had ditched her boyfriend. He had a quick temper and could be very sarcastic. Wilcox told her, I know the type, but let me tell you something. Tom Lynch has been asking about you. I think he likes you. Lacey had been careful not to seem too interested in Lynch, but she had been laying the groundwork for a planned encounter. Sometimes, on his way out, he stopped in the juice bar for a vitamin shake or a coffee. She began to go into the shop a few minutes before he finished his run and to sit at a table for two. The second week, her plan worked. When he entered the bar, she was alone at the small table, and all the other tables were taken. Lynch hesitated, then came over. Lacey had combed Heather's journal and copied down any mention of him. The first time he appeared had been about 1.5 years ago, when Heather had met him after one of the performances of her show. The nicest guy came out with us to Barrymore's for a hamburger. Tom Lynch, tall, really attractive, about 30, I'd guess. He has his own radio program in St. Louis, but says he's moving to Minneapolis soon. Kate is his cousin. That's why he came to the show tonight. An entry 4 months later read, Tom Lynch was in town over the weekend. A bunch of us were skiing at Stowe. He's really good and nice. He's the kind of guy Baba would love to see me with. But he isn't giving me or any of the girls a second look, and anyhow, it wouldn't make any difference now. 3 weeks later, Heather had died in the accident. But what had Heather meant by writing, anyhow, it wouldn't make any difference now? Did she mean that Tom Lynch had a serious girlfriend, or did it mean that Heather was involved with someone herself? All these thoughts raced through Lacey's head as Lynch settled down across the table from her. It's Alice Carroll, isn't it? Yes, and you're Tom Lynch. So they tell me. I understand you've just moved to Minneapolis? That's right. Svensson had told her to answer questions with questions. Are you a native, Tom? She knew he wasn't, but it seemed like a natural thing to ask. No, I was born in Fargo, North Dakota, not that far from here. Next, he asked her where she worked. I'm just settling in. Now it's time to look for a job. What kind? Oh, I worked in billing in a doctor's office, but I'm going to try something different this time around. Lacey was anxious to change the drift of the conversation. "I was listening to you today. I liked your interview with the director of last week's revival of Chicago." "Thanks. My cousin Kate is in the chorus of the road company of The King and I that's in town now." Lacey saw the speculative look in his eyes. He's trying to decide whether to ask me to go with him to see it. Let him, she prayed. His cousin Kate had worked with Heather. She was the one who introduced them. "Alice, it's opening tomorrow night. I have 2 tickets. Would you like to go? And to the cast party afterwards?" It was time to call home, an event that Lacey both longed for and dreaded. This time, the location for the secure phone call was a room in a motel. George Svensson opened the door in response to her knock. "The line's ready. I'll put the call through for you. Now remember everything I told you, Alice." He always called her Alice. "I remember every word. Even to name a supermarket could give away my location. If I talk about the gym, don't dare refer to it as the Twin Cities Gym. Stay away from the weather. Since I don't have a job, that's a safe subject. Stretch it out." She saw a flicker of sympathy and understanding in his craggy face. "I'll make the connection, then take a walk. About half an hour." He left after he handed her the phone. "Hi, Mom. How's everyone?" "Well, Kit and Jay had to go to some cocktail reception. Kit sends her love. The boys are fine. Bonnie's a worry, though. Still so pale. She misses you. She has an idea that you're hiding because someone may try to kill you." Where did she get that idea, Lacey wondered. Her mother answered the unasked question. "I think she overheard Jay talking to Kit. I also learned from Alex that Jay has a big order to sell restaurant supplies to the casino hotel that Jimmy Landy is opening in Atlantic City, and apparently he has been worried that if Landy knew he was related to you, the order might get canceled." Trying to sound cheerful, Lacey told her mother that she was going to a gym regularly and really enjoying it. "I'm okay, Mom, really I am. From what they tell me, when the man I can identify is arrested, he'll be persuaded to turn state's evidence rather than go to prison. As soon as they make a deal with him, I'll be off the hook." She was horrified to hear deep sobs coming from the other end of the connection. "Lacey, I can't live like this. Every time I hear about a young woman anywhere who's been in an accident, I'm sure it's you. You've got to tell me where you are. You've got to." "Mom, they'd withdraw the protection. They'd throw me out of the program if they knew I told you. Lacey, I have to know." Lacey was looking out the window. She saw the ample frame of George Svensson approaching the steps. She whispered, "Mom, I'm in Minneapolis." And a sickening feeling came over Lacey that she had just made a terrible mistake. Landy's restaurant on West 56th Street was filled with a sparkling after-theater crowd, and Steve Abbott was acting as host, going from table to table, greeting and welcoming the diners. From the corner of his eye, he saw Jimmy enter the restaurant. As Landy entered, he glanced at the murals and noticed that Steve Abbott had taken care of his request, to have an artist paint Heather out of the pictures. He had also asked Steve to set up a meeting with Lacey Farrell. He motioned for Steve to come over. "Did you set up a dinner with that Farrell woman for me?" Abbott shrugged. "Can't reach her, Jimmy. She's left her job, and our home phone is disconnected. I guess she's off on some kind of vacation." Jimmy's face darkened. "She can't have gone too far. She's a witness. That detective who took my copy of Heather's journal has to know where she is." "Want me to talk to him?" "No, I'll do it." "Well, look who's here." The formidable figure of Richard J. Parker was coming through the restaurant doors, accompanied by his wife and son, Rick. "It's his wife's birthday, Jimmy. They have a reservation for 3. That's why RJ's wife is with him for a change." Jimmy knew that RJ not only cheated on his wife, but that he bullied her unmercifully as well. And the brat makes 3, Jimmy thought, as he moved across the foyer. He escorted them to their table. As Priscilla Parker sat down, she looked around. "This is such a pretty room, Jimmy, but there's something different. Oh, the paintings of Heather are gone. I thought it was time to remove them." He turned abruptly and left, so he did not see R.J. Parker's angry glance at his son, nor the way Rick Parker stared at the mural of the Bridge of Sighs, from which the painting of Heather as a young woman was now missing. It had been nearly 4 months since Lacey had had a reason to get dressed up. She studied herself in the mirror. "You look okay, Alice." Promptly at 6:30, Tom Lynch called on the intercom from the lobby. She was waiting with the apartment door open when he stepped out of the elevator and walked down the hall. "Alice, you look lovely." "Thanks, you're pretty fancy yourself. Come in." As they sat companionably sipping wine and eating pizza, for the first time since the night Isabel died, Lacey realized that she was actually enjoying herself. When they left the restaurant and crossed the street to the theater, he put his hand under her elbow. "You have to be careful. There are patches of black ice everywhere around here." If only you knew, Lacey thought. My life is a sheet of black ice. It was the 3rd time she had seen a production of The King and I. The last time had been when she was a freshman in college. That had been on Broadway, and her father had been in the orchestra pit. "Wish you were playing in this one tonight, Jack Farrell," she thought. Tom's cousin, Kate Knowles, was playing the role of Tuptim, the slave girl who tries to escape from the king's palace. She was a good actress with an exceptional voice. Lacey praised her enthusiastically to Tom during intermission. "Will she be riding with us to the party?" "No, she's going to go over with the cast. She'll meet us there." Kate and the other leads in the play were not the only stars at the party, Lacey realized. Tom Lynch was constantly surrounded by people. She slipped away from him to trade her wine for a Perrier. The party was in a mansion in a decidedly upscale suburb 20 minutes from downtown Minneapolis. The well-lighted property bordered on Lake Minnetonka, and standing at the window, Lacey could see that beyond the snow-covered lawn the lake was frozen solid. Lacey glanced about the room. Seeing that Kate Knowles was momentarily alone, she quickly made her way to her. "You were wonderful. Your interpretation of Tuptim was great." Tom Lynch joined them. "I see you two have gotten together. Alice, I'm sorry I got waylaid. I didn't mean to leave you on your own so long." Kate said to her cousin, "Tom, I wanted a chance to visit with you. Let's take off and have a cup of coffee somewhere." Lacey glanced at her watch. It was 1:30. Not wanting to stay up all night, she suggested having coffee at her place. On the drive back into Minneapolis, she insisted that Kate sit in the front seat with Tom. How could she bring up Heather Landy's name without seeming too abrupt? At her apartment, after she poured the coffee, Lacey, in talking to Kate, tried to steer the conversation around so that she could introduce Heather's name. "I went down to New York about 1.5 years ago and saw a revival of The Boyfriend. I read in your bio in the program tonight that you were in it, but I'm sure I'd remember it if I'd seen you." Kate laughed. "You must have gone the week I was out with the flu." "I do remember that there was a young actress with a really fine voice in the lead. I'm trying to think of her name." "Heather Landy. Tom, you remember her. She had a crush on you. Heather was killed in a car accident. A damn shame." Lacey asked Kate what happened. "Oh, she was driving home from a ski lodge in Stowe and went off the road. Her mother, poor thing, couldn't accept it. She came around to the theater, talking to all of us, searching for some reason behind the accident. She said that Heather had been upset about something shortly before that weekend and wanted to know if we had any idea what it was about." Kate shrugged. "I told her that I had noticed that Heather was terribly quiet the last week before she died, and I agreed that she was worried about something. I suggested that Heather may not have been concentrating on driving when she went into the skid." It's a dead end, Lacey thought. Kate doesn't know anything I don't already know. Kate Knowles put down her coffee cup. "That was great, Alice, but it's very late, and I've got to be on my way." She stood, then turned back to Lacey. "It's funny that Heather Landy's name should come up. I'd just been thinking about her. A letter her mother had written finally caught up with me. She was asking me to try again to remember anything I could that might explain Heather's behavior that weekend. There is one thing I might write her about, although it's probably not significant. A guy I've dated some, Bill Merrill. You met him, Tom. He's an investment banker at Chase in New York. Well, Bill knew Heather, too. Her name came up, and he mentioned that he had seen her in the afternoon before she died in the après-ski bar at the lodge. Bill had gone there with a bunch of guys, including a jerk named Rick Parker, who's in real estate in New York, and apparently had pulled something on Heather when she first came to the city. Bill said that when Heather spotted Parker, she practically ran out of the lodge. It's probably nothing, but Heather's mom is so anxious for any information about that weekend that she'd surely want to know. I think I'll write her first thing tomorrow. The sound of Lacey's coffee cup shattering on the floor broke the trance-like state she had entered when she heard Kate's mention of Isabel's letter and then of Rick Parker's name. Quickly covering her confusion and refusing their help, she busied herself with cleaning up the mess while calling out her good nights to Kate and Tom as they headed for the door. Alone in the kitchen, Lacey pressed her back against the wall, willing herself to be calm, resisting the urge to call out to Kate not to bother with the letter to Isabel Waring, since it was too late for it to matter to her. Mona Farrell drove into Manhattan for what had become her standing Saturday dinner date with Alex Carbine. She always looked forward to the evening with him, even though he left the table frequently to greet his regular customers and the occasional celebrities who came to his restaurant. She reached the parking lot on West 46th Street at 7:30. Alex didn't expect her at the restaurant until 8, which meant she would have time to do something that had occurred to her earlier. At the newsstand in Times Square that carried out-of-town newspapers, she found a copy of the Minneapolis Star-Tribune. Even touching the paper made Lacey seem closer. "Would you like a bag, lady?" "Oh, yes, please." Mona fished in her purse for her wallet as the vendor folded the paper and put it in a thin plastic bag. When Mona reached the restaurant, Alex was already at their table. "Sorry, I guess I'm late." He got up and kissed her cheek. "You're not late, but your face is cold. Did you walk from New Jersey?" "No, I was early and decided to pick up a newspaper." Carlos, their usual waiter, was hovering nearby. "Mrs. Farrell, let me take your coat. Do you want to check your package?" "Why not keep that?" Alex suggested. He took the bag from her and put it on the empty chair at their table. It was, as always, a pleasant evening. Carlos had, as usual, hovered over their table attentively. The food was delicious. By the time they were sipping espresso, Alex Carbine's hand was covering hers. Alex saw her to her car at 11:30. At 1 o'clock, the restaurant closed and the staff went home. At 10 of 12, a phone call was made. The message was simple. "Tell Sandy it looks like she's in Minneapolis." What had happened between Heather Landy and Rick Parker? Lacey was stunned to learn that they had known each other. After Tom Lynch and Kate Knowles had left Friday night, she had been unable to sleep and had sat up for hours trying to make sense of it all. "It was because of Rick that I brought Caldwell to Heather's apartment. If Rick had known Caldwell somehow, then maybe the police would be able to track Caldwell down through Rick, and if they arrest Caldwell, then I'll be able to go home." Lacey stood up and began to pace the room excitedly. This could be part of what Isabel had seen in the journal. She had to get this information to Gary Baldwin at the U.S. Attorney's office. On Monday morning, Sandy Savarano took Northwest Flight 105 from LaGuardia Airport in New York to Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport. He rode first class as he had on the flight from Costa Rica, where he now lived. He was known to his neighbors there as Charles Austin, a well-to-do U.S. businessman who had sold his company 2 years ago at age 40 and retired to the tropical good life. "Lovely day to fly." The voice was that of a young woman in her late 20s who was seated next to him. "Yes, it is." He saw the look of interest in the young woman's eyes and was amused. Women actually found him attractive. Dr. Ivan Yankel, a Russian immigrant who had given him his new face 2 years ago, had been a genius. No doubt about it. Yankel had boasted when the last bandage came off. "You look fabulous, Sandy. No one would ever recognize you." "No one ever will, Doctor." Sandy always got a thrill remembering the look of astonishment in Yankel's eyes as he died. Pretending to read a magazine, he reviewed his game plan. He had a 2-week reservation at the Radisson Plaza Hotel under the name James Burgess. If he hadn't found Farrell by then, he would move to another hotel. No use arousing curiosity by staying too long. He had been supplied with some suggestions as to where he might find her. She regularly used a health club in New York. It made sense to assume she would do the same thing in Minneapolis, so he would make the rounds of health clubs there. People didn't change their habits. She was also a theater buff. Well, the Orpheum in Minneapolis had touring shows virtually every week, and the Tyrone Guthrie Theater would be another place to look. Sandy knew that his attention to detail was the main reason he was still a free man, while so many of his fellow graduates of reform school were off serving long prison terms. The very thought made him shiver. The clanging of a cell door, waking up and knowing that he was trapped there, that it would never be any different, feeling the walls and ceiling close in on him, squeezing him, suffocating him. "It won't happen to me," Sandy promised himself. "I'd rather die first." Sandy Savarano began to anticipate the look he would see in Lacey Farrell's eyes when he shot her. It was Monday afternoon. Steve Abbott had insisted on accompanying Jimmy Landy to a meeting with Detectives Sloan and Mars in the 19th Precinct station house. The anger in Jimmy's voice was reflected in his face. "I want to know what's going on. The cops have to know where Lacey Farrell is. She can't have just disappeared. She's a witness to a murder." Detective Sloan and Mars admitted reluctantly that Lacey Farrell had been placed in the Federal Witness Protection Program because an attempt had been made on her life. Steve Abbott looked at the two detectives. Why wasn't Mr. Landy informed earlier about what happened to Ms. Farrell? Sloan reached for a cigarette. "Mr. Abbott, we're not going to rest until we find and prosecute Isabel Waring's murderer." Jimmy's anger exploded once again. "You told me you thought Isabel's death was just a matter of having been at the wrong place at the wrong time. Now you're telling me that the Farrell woman is in a witness protection program, and you're admitting that Heather's journal was stolen from under your noses right here in this station. This was no random killing, and you've known it from day one." Eddie Sloan saw the anger and disgust that flared in Jimmy Landy's eyes. I don't blame him, the detective thought. His ex-wife is dead. We lose something intended for him that may be crucial evidence. The woman who brought the killer into his ex-wife's apartment has disappeared. For both detectives, it had been a lousy 4 months since that October evening when the 911 call from 3 East 70th had been received in the station house. Eddie was grateful that the district attorney had gone toe-to-toe with U.S. Attorney Baldwin's office. The DA had been adamant that the NYPD was not signing off on this one. Nick Mars replied heatedly, "Mr. Landy, we want to find Miss Waring's killer just as much as you do, but if Miss Farrell hadn't taken that journal from Isabel Waring's apartment, apparently with the idea of giving it to you, we might be a lot further along in this investigation." Abbott snapped, his anger now evident. "Be honest with us, Detective. You can't be sure of very much, except that you botched this investigation. Come on, Jimmy. I think it's time we hire our own investigator." Jimmy Landy got to his feet. "That's what I should have done the minute I got the call about Isabel. I want the copy of my daughter's journal I gave you before you lose that one, too." Sloan nodded calmly. "We ran off extras. Nick, get the set Mr. Landy gave us." While they waited, Sloan turned to Jimmy. "I can only imagine how difficult all this is for you, but I'm going to ask you to read the journal carefully now. We've gone through it as thoroughly as we know how. We can't find anything even potentially helpful." They sat in silence until Nick Mars returned to the interrogation room with a manila envelope which he held out to Landy. Jimmy yanked it from him and opened the envelope. Pulling out the contents, he glanced through them, then stopped at the last page. "What are you trying to pull now? I can tell you right now there were more pages than this. The last couple of pages in the set I gave you weren't written on lined paper. I remember because they were all messed up. The originals must have had blood stains. I couldn't stand the sight of them. So where are they? Did you lose those too?" After checking into the Radisson Plaza Hotel, Sandy Severano spent the rest of his first day in Minneapolis poring over the phone book and making a list of the health clubs and gyms in the metropolitan area. His plan was simple. He'd go to them, pretend he was interested in joining, then flash Farrell's picture. He would claim that she was his daughter and had left home after a family misunderstanding. He was trying to find her because her mother was sick with worry about her. On Tuesday morning at a payphone, Lacey called and left a message for George Svensson. "I have new information concerning the Heather Landy case that I must give directly to Mr. Baldwin at the U.S. Attorney's office." As U.S. Attorney Gary Baldwin told NYPD Detective Ed Sloan, he did not suffer fools gladly. He had been infuriated by the phone call from Sloan the previous afternoon, informing him that several pages of Jimmy Landy's copy of his daughter's journal apparently had vanished while it was in the police station. When Sloan phoned again 24 hours later, it gave Baldwin a second chance to air his grievances. As he listened to the tirade, Detective Ed Sloan was incensed by the fact that the original journal, as well as possibly several pages from the copy, had disappeared from his locked evidence box. Clearly it was his fault. He carried the keys to the box in the cubby on the heavy keyring that he kept in his jacket pocket. And he was always taking off his jacket, so virtually anybody could have taken the keyring out of his pocket. He told Baldwin that Landy's partner, Steve Abbott, just called him. In a way, Abbott apologized. He said that thinking it over, it's possible that Landy was mistaken about the pages he thinks are missing. He said the night Jimmy got the journal from Lacey Farrell, it was so tough on him to try to read it that he put it aside. The next night he got smashed before he looked at it. Then a day later we took his copy from him. Baldwin's voice was cold. Even if Landy is wrong about the missing pages, the original journal clearly was taken while in your possession, which means you've got someone in the precinct who's working both sides of the street. I suggest you do some house cleaning up there." Then Baldwin hung up. For the rest of the afternoon, Gary Baldwin's staff endured the fallout from his frustration. Then his mood changed suddenly when he received word that the secured witness, Lacey Farrell, had new information for him. George Svensson drove to Lacey's apartment building and waited for her in his car. When she got home from the gym, he didn't even give her a chance to go inside. "Baldwin is jumping up and down waiting to talk to you, so we're going to do this now." For tonight's call, Svensson had set up a secure line in a hotel room. He told Lacey that he would wait in the hotel lobby while she was talking to Baldwin. The phone at the other end was picked up on the first ring. Baldwin identified himself. Lacey said, "Mr. Baldwin, I have some information that I think may be very important." "I hope so, Ms. Farrell. What is it?" "I have learned that Rick Parker, remember him? He was one of the Parkers of the Parker & Parker I used to work for. Rick was in the same ski lodge as Heather Landy only hours before Heather died, and that she seemed frightened, or at least very agitated, when she saw him." There was a long pause, then Baldwin asked, "How did you possibly come by that information in Minnesota, Ms. Farrell?" Lacey realized suddenly that she had not thought this revelation through before making the phone call. She had never admitted to anyone that she had made herself a copy of Heather Landy's journal before she turned it over to Detective Sloan. She already had been threatened with prosecution because she had taken the original journal pages from Isabel's apartment. She knew they never would believe that she had made a secret copy of it only to honor her promise to Isabel to read it. Lacey spoke carefully as though wending her way through a minefield. "I have made a few friends out here, Mr. Baldwin. One of them invited me to a party for the road company production of The King and I. I chatted with Kate Knowles, an actress in the group, and it came up that she had been in a revival of The Boyfriend that ran off Broadway 2 years ago. We talked about it. I saw that show with Heather Landy in the lead. You never told us that you knew Heather Landy. There was nothing to tell. Detective Sloane asked me if I knew Heather Landy. The answer I gave him, which happens to be the truth, is that no, I didn't know her. I, like hundreds and perhaps thousands of other theater-goers, saw her perform in a musical. All right, Ms. Farrell, you've made your point. Then what? Lacey was gripping the phone tightly with her right hand, reminding herself to stay calm. Kate Knowles has a boyfriend. He lives in New York. His name is Bill Merrill. He's an investment banker with Chase. Apparently, he is a friend of Rick Parker, or at least knows him. Bill told Kate he had seen Heather in the après-ski bar of the Big Lodge in Stowe the afternoon before she died. When Rick came in, she became upset and apparently broke off their conversation and left the bar almost immediately. He's sure this was the afternoon before Heather died? That's what Kate said. Miss Farrell, let me ask you something. You worked for Parker & Parker for some 8 years, and through this whole thing with Isabel Waring, Rick Parker never communicated to you that he knew or might have known Heather Landy? No, he did not. May I remind you, Mr. Baldwin, Rick is the only one in the office who spoke, or supposedly spoke, to that man who turned out to be Isabel Waring's killer. Wouldn't it have been natural in the weeks I was showing that apartment and telling Rick about Isabel Waring and her obsession over her daughter's death for him to have said he knew Heather? Ms. Farrell, we'll follow up on this information immediately. However, it's very important that you be extremely careful not to let your guard down. If even one person knows where you can be reached, we will have to relocate you. Don't worry about me, Mr. Baldwin. As she hung up the phone, it was with a sinking heart she thought again about telling her mother she was in Minneapolis. Rick Parker had taken more than a dozen prospective buyers to look at the Waring apartment. A few times he had seemed to be on the verge of a sale, but each time the potential buyer had pulled back from making an offer. Now he had another strong possibility. Shirley Forbes, a 50-ish divorcee. Shirley Forbes announced her decision as she and Rick stood in the bedroom where Isabel Waring had died. I'm sorry, Mr. Parker. It's exactly what I want, but I just know I'd never spend a comfortable moment alone here. I'd keep thinking of the way that poor woman died, trapped and defenseless. Her eyes unnaturally wide behind oversized glasses, Mrs. Forbes pointed to the bed. I've read all about it. She was resting right here in her own bedroom, and someone came in and shot her. And then that real estate agent came in just in time to hear her beg for her life. Rick turned abruptly. Okay, you've made your point. Let's go. The woman followed him through the sitting room and down the stairs. I'm afraid I've upset you, Mr. Parker. I'm so sorry. Did you know either Heather Landy or Mrs. Waring? Rick wanted to rip off those idiotic glasses and grind them under his feet. He wanted to push this stupid woman, this voyeur, down the stairs. She had no intention of buying. She saved him the trouble of telling her to get out by saying, I really must rush now. I'll call you in a few days to see if anything else has come up. Back at the 19th Precinct, undercover detective Betty Pons, the woman Rick Parker knew as Shirley Forbes, reported to Detective Sloane. Parker's so jumpy that he's twitching. Before too long, he'll crack like a broken egg. You should have seen the look in his eyes when I described how Isabel Waring died. Rick Parker is scared silly. Sloane nodded. He has a lot more to be worried about. The feds are talking right now to a guy who can place Parker in Stowe the afternoon before Heather Landy died. At 1 o'clock, Sloane phoned Parker & Parker to ask Rick Parker to come down to the station. He was told that Rick had not returned to the office since leaving for a 10:30 appointment. By the next morning, it was plain that Rick Parker had disappeared. It had become clear to Lacey that she could not continue to go to the Twin Cities gym because she would just keep running into Tom Lynch. Inevitably, they would end up going out together, and there was just no way she could tolerate the constant fabrication and the web of lies she would have to spin. She decided to spend the weekend hunting for another gym or health club, and this time one that had a squash court. She really missed that. She went through the newspaper and noticed that a new health club had opened in Edina, a suburb to Minneapolis. She called and found out it had a great squash court. She decided to give it a try. Lottie Hoffman read the New York papers every morning over her solitary breakfast. For 45 years, up until a little over a year ago, she and Max had shared them. It was still unreal to Lottie that on that day in early December, Max had gone out for his usual early morning walk and never returned. An item on page 3 of the Daily News caught her eye. Richard J. Parker, Jr., wanted for questioning in the murder of Isabel Waring, had disappeared. Lottie pushed her chair back and went to the desk in the living room. She took out the letter Isabel Waring had written Max the very day before she had been murdered. She read it once again. Dear Max, I tried to phone you today, but your number is unlisted, which is why I am writing. I am sure that you must have heard that Heather died in an accident last December. The circumstances of her death have been especially troublesome. In clearing out her apartment, I have come across her journal, and in it she refers to her intention of meeting you for lunch. That was only 5 days before her death. She does not mention either you or the lunch date after that. Instead, the next 2 entries in the journal indicate that she was clearly distraught, although there is no indication of what was actually bothering her. Max, you worked at Jimmy's restaurant for the first 15 years of Heather's life. You were the best captain he ever had, and I know how much he regretted your leaving him. Remember when Heather was 2 and you did magic tricks to make her sit still for the artist who was painting her into the mural? Heather loved and trusted you, and it is my hope that she may have confided in you when you saw her. Max, in any event, will you please phone me? I'm staying in Heather's apartment. Lottie thought back to that time. I called Isabel Waring. She was so shocked when I told her that Max had been killed by a hit-and-run driver only 2 days before Heather's death. At that time, I still thought his death was an accident. Isabel asked me if I had any idea what Max and Heather might have talked about. I told her what I knew. I told her that I'd never met Heather, although I had gone with my senior citizen group to see the production of The Boyfriend when she was appearing in it. I told her sometime soon after that I had gone on a day outing with the same group to Mohunk Mountain House, a resort in the Catskills. I had seen Heather there a second and last time. I took a walk along the trails and saw a couple in ski clothes with their arms around each other. They were in a gazebo, all lovey-dovey. I recognized Heather, but not the guy she was with. That night I told Max about it. He asked about Heather's boyfriend. When I described him, Max knew who I was talking about and became terribly upset. He said the man had been very careful, that there wasn't a breath of suspicion against him, but Max said he was a racketeer and a drug dealer. Max didn't tell me the man's name, and before I could describe him to Isabel Waring, Isabel had said, I hear someone downstairs. It must be the real estate agent. I'll call you right back. Lottie waited for the call all evening, and then she heard the 11 o'clock news. It was only then that the full impact of what must have happened had hit her. Whoever had come in while she and Isabel were on the phone must have been Isabel Waring's murderer. Isabel was dead because she would not stop looking for the reason for Heather's death. And now Lottie was convinced that Max was dead because he had warned Heather away from the man she was seeing. What would Max want her to do? The answer was very calming, and it came to her as clearly as if Max were sitting across the table from her. Do absolutely nothing, Lottie. Keep your mouth shut. Kit looked at her daughter's woebegone face. Now, Bonnie, don't be like that. Daddy and Nana and I are just going to dinner in New York. Don't forget, Nana promised that next week when Lacey phones, you can talk to her. Jay told his daughter, Now go on downstairs, sweetheart, so we can finish getting dressed." He waited until he heard Bonnie's footsteps going down the stairs. "Kit, we can't be late for this dinner. I don't think you understand how I've sweated this order for Jimmy Landy's casino." He pulled on his jacket. "And Kit, remember that Jimmy just found out from some private detective he hired that Lacey is my sister-in-law. In fact, Alex said that's why Landy called him to set up the dinner." "Why Alex?" "Because he also found out that Alex is dating your mother." Kit's eyes flashed. "What else does Jimmy Landy know about us? Does he know that my sister could have been killed if she'd gone into Isabel Waring's apartment 5 minutes earlier? Does he know that our child is recovering from a bullet wound and is under treatment for depression?" Jay Taylor put his arm around his wife's shoulders. "Kit, please, it'll be okay, I promise. But we have to go. Don't forget, we've got to pick up your mother." Mona Farrell had carried the phone to the window and was looking outside when she saw the car pull up. "They're here, Lacey. I'm going to have to go." They had been talking for nearly 40 minutes. Lacey knew that Deputy Marshal Svensson would be getting impatient, but she had been especially reluctant to break the connection tonight. As she started to say goodbye, Lacey cautioned, "Mom, for heaven's sake, be careful not to tell anyone where I am. You've got to swear to me." "Lacey, don't you think I understand the danger I'd put you in? Don't worry. No one will learn anything from me. No, I really do have to go. I can't keep them waiting. What have you got planned for tonight?" "I'm signed up at a new gym. It has a great squash court. Should be fun." Mona Farrell was genuinely pleased. "Oh, I know how much you love to play squash. Love and miss you, dear. Goodbye." Mona hurried down to the car, thinking that at least she could tell Kit and Jay and Alex what Lacey was doing for recreation. On Friday evening, Tom Lynch decided to go over to the gym and work out for a while. When he came out of the men's locker room, he looked around, but it was clear that Alice Carroll wasn't there. Through the glass that surrounded the manager's office, he could see Ruth Wilcox in deep conversation with a gray-haired man. As he watched, Ruth shook her head several times. When the man left, he decided he had to ask Ruth if she had heard anything from Alice. "Have I got news for you, Tom? That gray-haired guy is Alice's father. Or at least he says he is. He even showed me her picture and asked if I'd seen her." Tom's instincts as a newsman were aroused. "What did you tell him?" "I didn't say anything. How do I know he wasn't a bill collector or something? I said that I couldn't be sure. Then he told me that his daughter and his wife had had a terrible misunderstanding and that he knew his daughter had moved to Minneapolis 4 months ago. His wife is very sick and desperate to make amends before she dies." "Ruth, that sounds phony as hell to me. He didn't give you his name or tell you where he's staying?" "No." Tom thought, if there's one thing I know about Alice Carroll, it's that no matter how big a misunderstanding, she's not the kind who would turn her back on a terminally ill mother. Detective Ed Sloan worked the 8 to 4 day shift, but at 5:30 on Friday evening he was still in his office at the 19th Precinct, with Rick Parker's file spread out on his desk. Rick's disappearance was a sure sign that they were on the right track. Now they knew that Parker had been at the ski lodge and that Heather Landy was spooked when she had seen him there, only hours before her death. Sloan once again read through the thick file. Richard J. Parker, Jr., only child, 31 years old. Kicked out of 2 prestigious prep schools for possession of drugs. Suspicion but no proof of selling drugs. Witness probably paid off to recant. Took 6 years to finally finish college at age 23. Father paid for damages to fraternity house during wild party. First and only job at Parker & Parker, 5 years in the West 67th Street branch office, 3 years to present in East 62nd Street main office. It hadn't been hard for Sloan to learn that Rick's co-workers on the West Side had despised him. One former employee of Parker & Parker told Sloan, "Rick would be out partying all night, show up with a hangover or still high on coke, and then start throwing his weight around in the office." 5 years ago, Rick's father had elected to settle a sexual assault complaint brought against Rick by a young secretary, rather than have a public scandal. Following that episode, Parker Sr. had pulled the rug out from under his son. The income from Rick's trust fund had been frozen, and he had been put on exactly the same base salary plus sales commission as his fellow employees. Papa must have taken a course on tough love. There's one problem with that scenario, however. Tough love doesn't support a cocaine habit. So where's Rick been getting his money for drugs, and if he's still alive, who's paying for him to hide out? Ed Sloan grunted and got up. Theoretically, he was off for the weekend, but he was going to drive up to Greenwich, Connecticut, and have a little chat with R.J. Parker Sr. Yes, it definitely was time for him to visit the palatial estate where Rick Parker had been raised, and had been given everything that money could buy. Jimmy Landy sat down at the reserved table in Alex's place, an attractive dining room with dark green walls brightened by colorful paintings in ornate gold frames. He greeted a former employee. "So Alex has made you a captain, Carlos." "Yes, he did, Mr. Landy." Steve Abbott looked up. "If you'd waited a while, Jimmy would have promoted you." Alex Carbine smiled. "In any case, it's a moot point. Now, what are you having to drink? I want you to try my wine." Later, when Kit, Jay, and Mona joined the dinner table, Kit thought how Jimmy Landy wasn't the kind of man she had anticipated. Jay had been so worried about not keeping him waiting, but Landy certainly didn't seem upset that they had been a couple of minutes late. Kit instinctively liked Jimmy's partner, Steve Abbott. Alex had told him that he had become something of a surrogate son to Jimmy, and that they were very close. As dinner progressed, Kit could see that Steve and Alex were deliberately keeping the conversation away from any mention of either Lacey or Isabel Waring. Between them, they got Landy to tell some amusing stories about encounters with some of his celebrity clients. As soon as the coffee was served, it was Jimmy who abruptly began to discuss Lacey and Isabel Waring. "Miss Farrell, I met your daughter once. She was trying to keep her promise to my ex-wife by delivering my daughter's journal to me. I wasn't very nice to her. She'd brought me a copy of the journal instead of the original, and at the time I thought she had a hell of a nerve to decide to give the original to the cops. I now know that your daughter's in that witness protection plan. Pretty lousy for her and for all of you." Mona nodded. "Yes, it is. How do you stay in touch with her?" "She calls once a week." "You can't call her?" "Absolutely not, Mr. Landy. I wouldn't know where to reach her." "Then maybe you could ask her this question for me. Ask her if she remembers if there were a couple of unlined pages with writing on them at the end of Heather's journal." "Why is that important, Jimmy?" Alex Carbine asked. "Because if there were, it means that none of the evidence delivered to that precinct is going to be safe. It's going to be doctored or disappear, and I got to find a way to do something about it." Jimmy waved away Carlos, who was standing behind him with the coffee carafe. Then he stood and extended his hand to Mona. "Well, that's it, I guess. I'm sorry for you, Mrs. Farrell. I'm sorry for your daughter. I owe her an apology. How is she doing?" "Lacey is a trooper. She never complains." She turned to Kit and Jay. "I forgot to tell you two in the car that Lacey just joined a brand new health club, apparently one that has a fabulous squash court." She turned back to Landy. "She's always been a demon for exercise." After completing her call to her mother and dining out, Lacey went home where she was haunted by the sense that something or someone was closing in on her. Tom Lynch had left her a message. "Alice, it's imperative that I see you tomorrow. Please call me back." He left his number. Ruth Wilcox had phoned as well. "Alice, we miss you. Please come in over the weekend. I want to talk to you about a gentleman who was inquiring about you." Ruth, still playing the matchmaker, Lacey thought wryly. She went to bed and managed to fall asleep, but then drifted promptly into a nightmare. In it, she was kneeling beside Isabel's body. A hand touched her shoulder. She looked up and saw Isabel's murderer, his pale blue eyes staring down at her. The pistol he was holding pointed at her head. She bolted up in bed, trying to scream. After that, it was no use. There was no more sleep for the rest of the night. Early in the morning, Lacey made herself go out for a jog, but found she could not resist casting frequent glances over her shoulder to make certain she was not being followed. She got to the Edina Health Club at 10:15 and was waved to a seat in the business office as the manager wound up a phone call by saying, "Yes, indeed, sir. We're a brand-new facility and have a wonderful squash court. Do come right over and take a look." After she had given the manager at the Edina Health Club her completed registration forms and her check, Lacey went directly to the squash court and began hitting balls against the wall. She kept missing easy returns, and then she fell, badly wrenching her ankle, all in an attempt to connect with a ball she had no chance of hitting. It was typical of her life right now. Disgusted with herself and close to tears, she limped off the court and collected her coat and tote bag from the locker. The door to the manager's office was partially open. Inside, a young couple was sitting at the manager's desk, and a gray-haired man was waiting outside the office. Lacey could feel her ankle swelling already. She decided to go straight home and put ice on it. After Lacey pulled into a designated parking spot behind her apartment building, she turned off the engine and sat for a moment in the silence. Her life was a total mess. Here she was, hundreds of miles away from her family, living an existence that could not be called a life, alone and lonely. She was trapped in a lie, having to pretend to be someone other than herself. She opened the door and got out of the car, careful to favor her throbbing right ankle. As she turned to lock the door, she felt a hand on her shoulder. She lunged forward, trying to break away. An arm went around her, steadying her. "Alice, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to frighten you. Forgive me." It was Tom Lynch. Limp with relief, Lacey sagged against him and started to cry. Then she straightened and turned to face him. She couldn't do this, not to him, not to herself. She made herself breathe normally and wiped away the tears. "I'm sorry you bothered to come, Tom. I'm going upstairs." "I'm coming with you." "Tom, we have nothing to talk about." "Oh, but we do, starting with the fact that your father is looking all over Minneapolis for you because your mother is dying and wants to make up with you." Lacey's lips felt rubbery. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the fact that Ruth Wilcox told me yesterday afternoon some guy had showed up at the gym with your picture looking for you and claiming to be your father." "He's in Minneapolis," Lacey thought. "He's going to find me." "Alice, is it true? Is that your father looking for you?" She shook her head, desperate now to be free of him. "Tom, please go away. I have to call home and talk to my mother." "Then that story is true?" She nodded, careful not to look at him. "Tom, can I phone you later?" Tom opened the door to the lobby for her. "When will I hear from you?" She looked at him again, forcing a smile. "In an hour or so." Lacey waited in the lobby until she saw his dark blue BMW drive away. Then she rushed to the elevator and up to her apartment. It was Saturday. There was a chance her mother was home. For the first time in months, Lacey dialed the familiar number directly. Her mother picked up on the first ring. "Mom, who did you tell I was here?" "Lacey, I didn't tell a soul. Why?" Didn't deliberately tell a soul, Lacey thought. "Mom, that dinner last night, who all was there?" "Alex and Kit and Jay and Jimmy Landy and his partner Steve Abbott and I. Why?" "Did you say anything about me?" "Nothing significant, only that you joined a new health club with a squash court. That was all right, wasn't it?" My God, Lacey thought. "Lacey, Mr. Landy wants very much to talk to you. He asked me to find out if you knew whether the last few pages of his daughter's journal were written on unlined paper. Because he said that if they were, somebody stole those pages from the copy while it was at the police station. Lacey, are you telling me that whoever tried to kill you knows you're in Minneapolis?" "Mom, I can't talk. I'll call you later." Lacey hung up. She tried the manager at the Edina Health Club to find out if anyone had been asking about her. "This is Alice Carroll." "Oh, Alice, your dad came in looking for you. I took him to the squash court. I thought you were still there. Someone told us you gave your ankle a nasty wrench. Your dad was so worried. I gave him your address. That was all right, wasn't it? He left just a couple of minutes ago." Lacey stopped only long enough to jam the copy of Heather Landy's journal into her tote bag. She half ran, half hopped to the car and headed for the airport. There was a plane leaving for Chicago 12 minutes after she reached the ticket counter. She managed to get on it just before the gates closed. Sandy Savarano sat in his rental car, the street map of the city unfolded in front of him, the thrill of the chase warming him. He had found 520 Hennepin Avenue on the map. It was just 10 minutes from the Radisson Plaza where he had been staying. He took the car out of park and stepped on the accelerator. He was close. This was the part he liked most. The attendant said he had noticed that Farrell was limping when she left the club. If she had hurt herself badly enough to limp, chances were she went directly home. Alice Carroll was the name she had taken. Shouldn't be too difficult to find out the number of her apartment. Probably would be on her mailbox in the lobby. 520 Hennepin was a nondescript corner building, 7 stories high, not large, which was better for him. Savarano was sure the building would have little in the way of security. The names and apartment numbers of the residents were on the wall above the mailboxes. Alice Carroll was in apartment 4F. Typical of such buildings, in order to gain admittance to the lobby, it was necessary to either have a key or to use the intercom to get a resident to buzz down and release the lock. Savarano waited impatiently until he saw someone coming up the walk, an elderly woman. As she opened the outer door, he dropped a keyring on the floor and bent down to retrieve it. When the woman unlocked the door that opened to the lobby, he straightened up and held it for her, then followed her in. She gave him a grateful smile. He followed her to the elevator, then waited until she had pushed the button for the 7th floor before he pushed 4. Once on the 4th floor, he turned down the corridor. 4F was the last apartment on the left. He had his story ready if Farrell wanted to know who was there before she opened the door. "Emergency services checking a gas leak," he would say. It always had worked for him. There was no answer. In less than 4 minutes of working with the lock on the door to 4F, he was inside. He would wait for her here. Just then the phone rang. With swift cat-like steps, he crossed the room to stand beside it, glad to see that the answering machine was turned on. The caller left a message. "Alice, this is George Svensson. We're on the way. Your mother just phoned the emergency number in New York to report you are in trouble. Stay inside, bolt your door. Don't let anyone in until I get there." Savarano froze. They were on the way. In seconds he was out of the apartment, down the corridor, and onto the fire stairs. Safely back in his car, he had just joined the light traffic on Hennepin Avenue when police cars, lights flashing, roared past him. That had been as near a miss as any he had ever had. Where would Farrell go? He had to try to figure out how she would be thinking. Farrell hadn't called the feds out here when she realized she had been traced. No, she had called her mother. That's where she was headed. She was on her way to the airport and New York. The woman had to be scared. She wouldn't trust the cops to protect her. Her mother and sister lived in New Jersey. She would be easy enough to find. In the end, he always found his prey. The hunt was always fun, but the actual kill was the best. On Saturday morning, Detective Ed Sloan drove from his home in the Riverdale section of the Bronx to the meeting he had insisted on having with Richard J. Parker, Sr. in Greenwich, Connecticut. As he turned off the Merritt Parkway at Exit 3, Ed thought about the sting he had set into motion in the squad room, aimed at catching whoever had been taking things out of the evidence box. With the captain's help, he had concocted the story that a piece of evidence locked in his cubby just might turn out to be the key to solving Isabel Waring's murder. A hidden ceiling camera was now trained on his desk. Next week, he would start reverting to his old habit of leaving his keys in his jacket on the back of his desk chair. He had a feeling that with the kind of fake information he was passing around, there was a good chance he would smoke out his quarry. The Parker estate was situated on Long Island Sound. The handsome pale red brick mansion was turreted at either end, and old enough to have acquired a mellow patina. Sloane drove through the open gates and parked to the side of the semicircle at the main entrance. A very attractive young woman in a maid's uniform admitted him, and when he gave his name, told him he was expected. As he followed her down a wide, carpeted foyer, he reviewed what he knew of Parker Sr. He had heard that he had the reputation of being a womanizer, and wondered as he looked at the attractive young woman ahead of him if Parker was fool enough to try anything in his own home. He just might be that damn foolish, Sloane decided a few minutes later. He found Mr. Parker sitting on a leather couch, sipping coffee. Parker neither got up to greet him, nor did he offer him coffee. "Sit down, Detective Sloane." Sloane began. "Mr. Parker, I am here to talk to you about your son. He is well on the way to being considered a suspect in not one but 2 murder cases. You are certainly aware that your son was the one who cleared the way for the killer to get into Isabel Waring's apartment. That alone makes him an accessory before the fact. A bench warrant on that charge is about to be issued for his arrest. But here's another piece of information you should know about your son. Rick was in Stowe the afternoon before Heather Landy died, and we have an eyewitness who can testify that she appeared to be frightened of him and ran out of the ski lodge when he showed up." Red patches mottled Parker's face, revealing his agitation. "Is that all, Detective?" "Not quite. Your pride and joy, Richard J. Parker, Jr., is a drug addict. Chances are that means he owes someone a lot of money. My advice to you is to hire a criminal lawyer for him and tell him to surrender to us. Otherwise, you might face charges yourself." "I don't know where he is." Sloane stood up. "I think you do." Suddenly, a woman spoke behind him. "My son is in a drug rehabilitation clinic in Hartford." The voice belonged to Priscilla Parker. She was standing in the doorway. "I drove him there last Wednesday. My husband is being honest when he says he doesn't know where his son is. Rick came to me for help. His father was otherwise occupied that day." Her eyes rested on her husband, contempt and loathing written clearly on her face. Later that day, Detective Ed Sloane and Priscilla Parker sat together as they waited for her son Rick to appear. The Harding Manor sitting room was exceptionally comfortable. Finally, Mrs. Parker spoke. "I know what you must think of my son, but you don't realize how much goodness and promise there is in him. His father has always spoiled him. When he got into trouble over drugs in prep school, I pleaded with my husband to make him face the consequences. But instead, he bought people off. What young man learns about a sense of decency when his father puts a maid's uniform on his mistress of the month and brings her into his own home? Mr. Sloane, Rick's in a lot of trouble, isn't he?" "Not if he's innocent, Mrs. Parker, and not if he cooperates. It's up to him." Sloane repeated those words to Rick Parker as he waited for him to sign a Miranda warning. "All right, Detective, what do you want to know?" "Why did you send Curtis Caldwell to Isabel Waring's apartment?" Beads of perspiration appeared on Parker's forehead as he spoke. "You know the reason I'm here. I have a drug habit, and I simply haven't been able to cover it. In early October, I got a call from my dealer, the one I owe the money to, saying that he knew someone who wanted to see the apartment. He also said he knew this guy might not meet our standards, but if he liked it, things could be worked out. Were you threatened in case you didn't go along with that?" Parker rubbed his forehead. "Look, all I can tell you is I knew what I had to do. I figured the guy could be a little shady, but I had no idea he was that bad. When Lacey Farrell told me that guy was the one who killed Heather's mother, I didn't know what to do." "Okay, now, What had been going on between you and Heather Landy?" Sloane saw Priscilla Parker squeeze her son's hand. "You've got to tell him, Rick." Parker looked directly at Ed Sloane. "I met Heather nearly 5 years ago when she came to our office looking for a West Side apartment. I started taking her around. She was beautiful. She was vivacious. She was fun." Sloane interrupted him. "You knew Jimmy Landy was her father?" "Yes, and that was part of what made me enjoy the situation so much. Jimmy had barred me from going into his place one night because I was drunk. It made me angry. I wasn't used to being denied anything. So when Heather wanted to get out of her contract for a co-op on West 77th Street, I saw my chance to have some fun, at least indirectly at Jimmy Landy's expense." "She signed a contract?" Rick nodded. "An airtight one. Then she came back to me in a panic. She found out her father had already bought her a place on East 70th. She begged me to tear up the contract. She was terrified of her father's temper." "What happened?" Rick paused and looked down at his hands. "I told her I would tear it up if I could take it out and trade." "You bastard," Sloane thought. She was a kid, new to New York, and you pulled that? "You see," Rick Parker said, and now it seemed to Sloane that he was almost talking to himself, "I didn't have the brains to realize what I really felt for Heather. I had been able to crook my finger, and any number of girls would come running. Heather had ignored my attempts to seduce her, so in the deal we made over the co-op contract, I saw a chance to get what I wanted and to even the score with her father. But the night she came to my apartment, she was clearly terrified, so I decided to back off. She really was a sweet kid, the kind I could actually fall in love with. In fact, maybe I did. I do know that I found myself suddenly very uncomfortable having her there. I teased her a little bit, and she started crying. So then I just told her to grow up and to leave, that I was too old for babies. I guess I succeeded in humiliating her enough to scare her away from me for good. I tried to call her, to see her after that, but she wouldn't have any part of it." "Did you tear up the contract?" "Oh, yes, Mr. Sloane, I had torn it up, but not before my father got wind of it and forced me to tell him what had happened. Our main office had sold the East Side apartment to Jimmy Landy for Heather, but that deal was peanuts compared to another deal that I found out was in the works. At that same time, my father was brokering the sale of the Atlantic City property to him. If Landy had found out what I pulled on Heather, it could have cost my father millions. That's when Daddy told me to make all this go away or get out." "Mr. Parker, we have an eyewitness who claims that Heather ran from the après-ski lounge in Stowe the afternoon before she died because she saw you there." Rick Parker shook his head. "I never saw her that day. The few times I had run into her, that was the reaction I got. She couldn't get away from me fast enough. Unfortunately, nothing would have changed that." To Sloane, he seemed sincere. Lacey arrived in Chicago at 4:30. From there, she took a 5:15 plane to Boston. Once again, she used her credit card, but she planned to pay cash for the Delta shuttle from Boston to New York. It was only as the plane was landing in Boston that Lacey realized she had finally figured out the one place she could stay in New York where no one would ever think of looking for her. It was 8:05 local time when she got off the plane at Logan Airport. Lacey made a phone call to Tim Powers, the superintendent of Isabel Waring's building. 4 years ago, when she was leaving 3 East 70th after showing an apartment, Lacey had been instrumental in preventing what surely would have been a terrible accident, and one for which Tim Powers would have been blamed. It had all happened so quickly. A child broke free from his nanny and raced into the street, thanks to the fact that Tim had left the building's front door open while he worked on it. Lacey's quick action had kept the child from being hit by a passing delivery truck. Tim, trembling from the shock of the near disaster, had vowed, "Lacey, it would have been my fault. If you ever need anything at all, you can count on me." Tim was astonished to hear from her. "Lacey Farrell, I thought you disappeared off the face of the earth." "Tim, I need help. You once promised—" He interrupted her. "Anything, Lacey." "I need a place to stay. I'm being followed. I think it's the man who killed Isabel Waring. I don't want to put you in danger, but I can't go to either my apartment or my family. He'd never look for me in your building. I want to stay at least for tonight in Isabel Waring's apartment. And please, Tim, this is very important. Don't tell anyone about this. Pretend we never spoke." The day clearly was not over for Detective Ed Sloan. After leaving Rick Parker at the Rehabilitation Center in Hartford, he phoned the precinct to check in. Nick Mars was there. "All hell is breaking loose. Lacey Farrell almost got nailed in Minneapolis, where the feds had her stashed. She's disappeared, and Baldwin thinks she's headed for New York. He wants to coordinate with us to find her before she gets nailed here. He wants to take her into custody as a material witness. Any luck finding Parker?" "I've found him. Call Baldwin and arrange a meeting." When Detective Sloan arrived at the 19th Precinct, Baldwin was still angry that Lacey Farrell had disappeared, but took time from his anger to congratulate Sloan on finding Rick Parker. "What did he tell you?" Sloan gave a full report and concluded, "I think he's telling the truth. I know the guy who sells Parker drugs. If he was the one who told Parker to set up the appointment that got Savarano into Isabel Waring's apartment, it was nothing he actually planned himself. He was just a messenger. Somebody passed the word to him." Sloan reached for a cigarette, then frowned. "They're in my jacket. Nick, would you get 'em for me?" "Sure, Ed." The round trip took Mars about a minute. He plunked the half-empty cigarette pack and a grimy ashtray on the table. Sloan lit up and looked at Baldwin. "What's the latest on Farrell?" "Her mother admits she knew Farrell was in Minneapolis, but she swears she didn't tell anyone. Although I don't believe that for a minute. Also, we flagged the credit card we gave Farrell. We know she used it to fly to Chicago, then to Boston. She's got to be on our way to New York. We have a tap on the phone in her apartment, on our mother's phone, her sister's phone. We've got a tail assigned to each family member in case they try to meet her somewhere." Sloan knew that now they had to wait. Tim Powers was standing outside the building when Lacey's cab pulled up. She paid the driver and hobbled out, thankful that finally she would be able to stop moving around. It was just in time because she could no longer deny the pain of her wrenched ankle. Tim opened the door to the lobby for her, then slipped her the key to the Waring apartment. "Tim, I can't tell you how much—" He interrupted her. "Lacey, get upstairs fast and lock the door. There's food in the fridge." She double-locked the door and then remembered that Curtis Caldwell had stolen the key Isabel kept on the foyer table. Had the lock been changed? She fastened the safety chain. Tim had drawn all the drapes and turned on lights. The framed pictures of Heather that had been scattered through the living room were still there. She almost expected to see Isabel walk down the stairs. There was a leather sofa in the library that converted into a bed, and adjacent to the library was the powder room. Those were the rooms she would use. There was no way that she could ever sleep in the bed in which Isabel had been shot. "Get something to eat, take a shower, go to bed," she told herself. "Get over your jumpiness. There's no place else to go." 40 minutes later, she was sitting wrapped in blankets on the couch in the library. The copy she had made of Heather Landy's journal was lying on the desk, the 3 unlined pages spread out side by side. They were the hardest to read because of the bloodstains. It was on these pages that Heather had written about being caught between a rock and a hard place, about not knowing what to do. The last entry that seemed upbeat was the one at the top of the first unlined page, where Heather wrote that she was going to have lunch with Max or Mac Huffner. The name was impossible to read clearly. Heather had added, "It should be fun. He says he's grown old and I've grown up." It sounds like she was going to meet an old friend, Lacey thought. She looked at the pages again. Neither Jimmy Landy nor the police had these 3 pages now. Hers was the only copy. Is there any way I can find out who this man is? Lacey wondered. I could look in the phone book, make some calls, or maybe I could simply phone Jimmy Landy himself. If anyone was going to unravel the secret, clearly it would have to be her. But could she do it in time to save her own life? Lacey glanced at the clock when she woke up. She pushed back the blankets and sat up. The 3 unlined pages still lay there, commanding her immediate attention. Once again, she read the first line of the first page. Lunch with Mr., or was it Mac, or Max, Huffner. It should be fun. He says he's grown old and I've grown up. He's the key to all this, Lacey decided. She had to get dressed, get something to eat. It was Sunday. Tim Powers said he would warn her if a real estate agent intended to bring a potential buyer to see the apartment. She fixed herself coffee and a toasted roll. At 8 o'clock, Tim Powers came up and they had coffee together in the library. How can I help you, Lacey? Obviously, you already have, Tim, but I was wondering if you have Jimmy Landy's personal number? Yes, I was out when he called the other day about selling the apartment and had to call him back. He picked up the phone himself. Tim, give me that number, please. Sure. You know this phone is still on. They never bothered to disconnect it. And Tim, I've got to get word to my mother that I'm all right. I'm sure her phone is tapped. Would you go to a public phone and call her? Sure. Tim left and called Lacey on the intercom from the lobby. He gave her Landy's phone number, then went out for a walk looking for a public phone. 5 blocks away on Madison Avenue, he found a phone that worked. 27 miles away in Wyckoff, New Jersey, Mona Farrell jumped at the sound of the telephone. Let it be Lacey, she prayed. A hearty, reassuring man's voice said, Mrs. Farrell, I'm calling for Lacey. She can't talk to you, but she wants you to know that she's okay and will get in touch with you herself as soon as she can. Lacey had warned him not to stay on the phone too long. Regretfully, he replaced the receiver, Mona Farrell's voice still pleading for him to tell her more. Every hour that I'm here doing nothing means that I'm an hour closer to being tracked down by Caldwell or taken into custody by Baldwin, Lacey thought. It was like being caught in a spider's web. If only she could talk to Kit. Kit had a good head on her shoulders. Of course, she thought. It's Sunday, almost 10 o'clock on Sunday morning. Kit and Jay are in church now. They always go to 10 o'clock Mass. Her spirits suddenly buoyed. She dialed New Jersey information and received the number of St. Elizabeth's Rectory. An answering machine clicked on. The only thing she could do was to leave a message and hope that Kit would get it before they left the church. It is urgent that I speak with Kit Taylor. I believe she is at the 10 o'clock Mass. I'll call this number again at 11:15. Please try to locate her. Lacey hung up, feeling helpless and trapped. There was another hour to kill. She dialed the number for Jimmy Landy she'd gotten from Tim. There was no answer, and when the machine picked up, she decided not to leave a message. What Lacey did not know was that she already had left a message. Jimmy Landy's caller ID showed the phone number from which a call to him had been placed, as well as the name and address of the person to whom the phone was registered. The message on the ID indicated that his caller had dialed from 555-8093, a number registered to Heather Landy at 3 East 70th Street. Detective Sloan had not planned to go to work on Sunday, but when the desk sergeant at the precinct phoned to say that a friend of Lacey Farrell's had called her mother from a payphone on 74th and Madison, nothing could have kept him home. When he reached the precinct, the sergeant nodded toward the captain's office. "The boss wants to talk to you." Captain Frank DeLeo's cheeks were flushed, usually a warning sign that something or someone had incurred his wrath. Today, however, Sloan saw immediately that DeLeo's eyes were troubled and sad. He knew what that combination meant. The sting had worked. They had pinned down the identity of the rogue cop. "The guys in the lab sent over a tape late last night, Ed. You're not going to like it." DeLeo pressed the power button, then play. Ed Sloan leaned forward and looked at the TV screen. On the upper left section of the screen, he could see the back of his own head as he sat in the interrogation room. He stared intently at the screen as Nick Mars scurried out of the interrogation room and looked around. There were only 2 other detectives in the squad room. One was on the phone with his back to Nick. The other was dozing. As they watched, Mars reached into Sloane's coat pocket and slid out his key ring, cupping it in his palm to conceal it. He then pulled a pack of cigarettes out of the breast pocket of Sloane's jacket. Ed Sloan was numb. His father's a cop. His grandfather was a cop. He's been given every break. Why? DeLeo shook his head. Why any bad cop? But Ed, this has to remain between you and me for now. That piece of film alone isn't enough to convict him. We have to do something, Frank. I don't want to have to sit across the table from him and work a case together. Oh, yes, you do. Baldwin's on his way here again. He thinks Lacey Farrell is in the neighborhood. Your job, as you well know, is to be damn sure Nick doesn't get the chance to lift or destroy any more evidence. It's a day for show and tell, Ed Sloan thought bitterly, as an assistant U.S. attorney prepared to replay the conversation they had taped between Lacey Farrell's mother and her unknown caller. When the recording began to play, Sloane's raised eyebrows were the only sign of the shock he was experiencing. He knew that voice from the countless times he had been in and out of 3 East 70th. It was Tim Powers, the superintendent there. He was the caller. And he's hiding Farrell in that building. The others sat silently, listening intently to the conversation. Nick Mars was sitting with his hands folded in his lap, frowning. Who would that rat tip off if he got wind that Powers was Lacey Farrell's guardian angel? Ed Sloan decided that for now, at least, only one person beside Tim Powers was going to know where Lacey Farrell was staying. Himself. Tim Powers tapped on the apartment door at 10:30, then let himself in with his master key. "Mission accomplished, Lacey." "Tim, how did my mother sound?" "Pretty shook up. I tried to tell her you're okay, but I just got a call from a new real estate agent, Douglaston and Minor. Jimmy's listed the apartment with them. The agent's coming with someone an hour from now. Lacey, I hate to—" "You can't keep me here, Tim. I'll clean up, then leave." After Tim left, she stacked the pages of Heather's journal together and put them in her tote bag. Despite Tim's reassurances that he didn't stay on the phone too long, she was sure that by now the police were scouring the neighborhood, searching for her. She would make one more attempt to reach Kit at St. Elizabeth's Rectory, but then she had to get out of there. She looked at her watch. She had just enough time to try Jimmy Landy's number once more. This time he answered on the 4th ring. Lacey knew she could not waste time. "Mr. Landy, this is Lacey Farrell. Just let me talk. The answer is yes. There were 3 unlined pages at the end of Heather's journal. Those pages were filled with her worries about hurting you. The only happy reference was right at the beginning, where she wrote about having lunch with some man who sounds like he must have been an old friend." "What's his name?" Jimmy demanded. "It looks like Mac or Max Huffner. I don't know the guy. Maybe he's someone her mother knew. Isabel's second husband was quite a bit older." He paused. "You're in a lot of trouble, aren't you, Miss Farrell?" "Yes, I am." "Where are you now?" "I can't tell you, but I'm convinced Isabel was onto something, and that's why she was killed. I'm sorry, I've got to go." Jimmy Landy heard the click as Lacey hung up. He laid down the receiver as Steve Abbott came into his office. "Who was that?" "Lacey Farrell. I guess her mother got my message to her." "Lacey Farrell? I thought she was in the witness protection plan." "She was, but not anymore, I guess." "Where is she now?" Jimmy looked at his caller ID. "She didn't say, and I guess I didn't have this on. Steve, did we ever have a guy with a name like Huffner work for us?" "I don't think so, Jimmy, unless it was a kitchen helper. You know how they come and go." Jimmy glanced toward the open door that led to the small waiting room. Someone was pacing outside. "Who's that guy out there?" "Carlos. He wants to come back. He says working for Alex is too quiet for him." "Get that bum out of here. I don't like sneaks around me." Jimmy stood up and walked to the window, his eyes focused on the distance as if Abbott weren't there. At 11:10, Lacey phoned the rectory of St. Elizabeth's in Wyckoff, New Jersey. This time the phone was answered on the first ring. Father Edwards. "Good morning, Father. I called earlier and left a message for Kit Taylor." "She's right here." Kit came on the phone. "Lacey, we miss you. We're so scared for you. Where are you?" "Trust me, it's better you don't know. But I can tell you that I have to get out of here quick. Kit, is Jay with you?" "Yes, of course. Put him on, please." Jay's greeting was a firm pronouncement. "Lacey, this can't go on. I'll hire an around-the-clock bodyguard from you, but you've got to stop running and let us help you." "Jay, I have to get out of here, and I can't call you at home. I'm sure now that the key to this whole terrible mess is to find out who was responsible for Heather Landy's death. I've got to find out exactly what caused Heather Landy to be so troubled during the last few days of her life. The clues are there in the pages of the journal. There's one name I think is important. About a week before she died, Heather had lunch with an older man whom she'd apparently known for a long time. My hope is that he was somehow connected to the restaurant business and that you may know him or could ask around about him." "What's his name?" "It's so blurred that it's hard to make it out. It looks like Mr. or Mac or Max Huffner." "Max Hoffman? Sure, I knew him. He worked for Jimmy Landy for years." "I didn't say Hoffman, but oh, dear God, that's it." Isabel's last words. Read it. Show him. Then that long, shuddering gasp. Man. Isabel died trying to tell me his name. "Jay, why did you say you knew him?" "Lacey, Max died over a year ago in a hit-and-run accident near his home in Great Neck. I went to his funeral." "Jay, how much over a year ago?" It was just about the time I bid on the job at the Red Roof Inn in Southampton, so that would have made it about 14 months ago, the first week in December. That's when Heather Landy was killed, 2 car accidents within days of each other. The apartment intercom was buzzing, a series of soft, quick jabs. Tim Powers was signaling her to get out. "Jay, I've got to leave. Stay there. I'll call you back. Just one thing. Was Max Hoffman married?" "For 45 years. "Jay, get his wife's address for me. I have to have it." Lacey grabbed her tote bag and a black hooded coat she had taken from Isabel's closet. Hobbling, she left the apartment and went down the corridor to the elevator. Tim Powers met her inside the staircase at the lobby level. He pressed folded bills into her hand and dropped a cellular phone in her pocket. "It will take them a while to trace any calls you make on this." "Tim, I can't thank you enough." "There's a cab waiting out in front with the door open. Keep that hood up." The cab driver was obviously annoyed at having to wait. "Where to, miss?" "Great Neck, Long Island." Lacey knew Kit and Jay were waiting in the rectory for her call, but if she could get the street address where Max Hoffman had lived another way, she would rather do it. She tried to get Mrs. Hoffman's address from the telephone information operator. There was a pause. "At the request of the customer, that number cannot be given out." The traffic was fairly light, and Lacey realized that they were getting close to Little Neck. Great Neck was the next town. What would she do if they arrived there and she didn't have an address to give this driver? And what if she was being followed? She called the rectory again. Jay answered immediately. "Jay, did you get the Hoffman Street address in Great Neck for me?" "Lacey, I haven't a clue. I did call Alex. He knew Max very well. He says he has the address in a Christmas card file somewhere. He's looking for it." For the first time in her horrible months-long ordeal, Lacey felt total despair. Then she heard Jay ask, "What can you do, Father?" "No, I don't know which funeral home." Father Edwards took over. The pastor called 2 funeral homes in Great Neck. Using only a slight ruse, he introduced himself and said that one of his parishioners wanted to send a mass card for Mr. Max Hoffman, who had died a year ago, December. The second funeral home acknowledged having made the arrangements for Mr. Hoffman. They willingly furnished Mrs. Hoffman's address to Father Edwards. Jay passed it to Lacey. "I'll talk to all of you later. For God's sake, don't tell anyone where I'm going." "At least I hope I'll talk to you later," she thought as the cab pulled into a gas station for directions to 10 Adams Place. It made Detective Ed Sloane's flesh crawl to be sitting next to Nick Mars, having to act as if everything were fine. Sloane knew he had to be on guard against sending out some hostile signals that Nick might pick up. They began their vigil of watching the apartment building at 3 East 70th Street at about 11:15, immediately after the meeting with Baldwin broke up. Nick, of course, didn't understand. "Ed, we're wasting our time. You don't really think Lacey Farrell got her old job back selling co-ops here, do you?" "Just call it an old dog's hunch, okay, Nick?" They were there only a few minutes when a woman in a long hooded coat walked out of the building and got into a waiting cab. Sloane couldn't see the woman's face, but as he watched her move, he sensed something familiar about her. "Let's go, Nick. She's in that cab." "You're kidding. Are you psychic, Ed, or just holding back on me?" "Just a hunch." They followed the cab through the Midtown Tunnel onto the Long Island Expressway. In Great Neck, the cab stopped at a gas station where the cabbie asked for directions. They followed her through town, past some obviously expensive houses. Gradually, the neighborhood they were driving through changed. The houses were much smaller, closer together. They were on Adams Place. The cab stopped in front of number 10. Sloane watched as Lacey Farrell got out of the cab. She seemed to be pleading with the driver, reaching back through the window, offering money. He kept shaking his head. Then he rolled up the window and drove away. Farrell watched the cab until it was out of sight. For the first time, he could fully see her face. Sloane thought she looked young and vulnerable and very scared. She turned and limped up the walk. Then she rang the bell. It didn't look as if the woman who had answered the door, opening it only a crack, was going to let her in. Lacey Farrell kept pointing to her ankle. Nick simpered. "My foot hurts. Please let me in, nice lady. Then I'll mug you." Sloane looked at his partner, wondering why he had ever found him amusing. He did not know that an amused and equally satisfied Sandy Savarano was watching him from a second-story bedroom in 10 Adams Place, where he had been patiently awaiting Lacey Farrell's arrival. Lottie Hoffman reluctantly admitted Lacey into her home. "Why did you come here? You can't stay here. I'll call another cab for you. Where do you want to go?" "Mrs. Hoffman, I haven't got any place to go. Someone is trying to kill me, and I think he's been sent by the same person who ordered your husband, Isabel Waring, and Heather Landy killed. And I think you're the one who can make it stop, Mrs. Hoffman. Please help me." Lottie Hoffman's eyes softened. She noticed Lacey's awkward stance, how she clearly favored one foot. "You're in pain. Come in. Sit down." Lacey sat on the living room couch and slipped off the heavy coat. "My little niece was shot and almost killed because of me. Please, Mrs. Hoffman, tell me. Did your husband know who was behind it?" Lottie Hoffman kept her head down, her eyes on the floor. "I'm afraid I can't talk about it. If Max had kept his mouth shut, he'd still be alive. So would Heather. So would her mother." "Tell me what you know, please, Mrs. Hoffman. Who is behind all this?" "The truth is, I don't know. I don't even know his name. Max did. If only I hadn't seen her that day at Mohunk. I told Max about it and described the man she was with. He got so upset. He said that the man was a drug dealer and a racketeer, but that no one knew it, that everyone thought he was respectable, even a good guy. So Max made the lunch date with Heather to warn her, and 2 days later he was dead." Tears welled up in Lottie Hoffman's eyes. "I miss Max so much, and I'm so scared." Sandy Savarano attached the silencer to his pistol. It had been child's play to get into this house, through the back window of this bedroom. The tree outside was like a staircase. He would be miles away before the cop sitting outside even suspected something was wrong. The old woman would be first. She was only a nuisance. What he wanted most was to see the expression in Lacey Farrell's eyes when he pointed the pistol at her. He wouldn't give her time to scream. No, there would be just long enough for her to make that whimpering little sound of recognition that was so thrilling to hear as she realized that she was about to die. Now. Alex Carbine called Landy's restaurant and asked to speak to Jimmy. When Jimmy Landy picked up his phone, it was clear from his voice that he was under immense strain. "Jimmy, I can tell something's wrong. Can I help?" "No, Alex, but thanks." "Well, look, I'm sorry to bother you, but I figured out something and wanted to pass it on to you. I understand Carlos is sniffing around for a job from you. Well, listen to me. Don't take him back. I think he's on the take somehow. It's been driving me nuts that Lacey Farrell was tracked down by this killer to where they had her hiding in Minneapolis." "Oh, is that where she was? I hadn't heard." "Yes, but only her mother knew it. And the night she learned that Lacey was in Minneapolis, she bought a copy of the Minneapolis Star-Tribune and had it with her at dinner. I saw her slip it back in the bag when I came to the table, but I never asked her about it. I noticed that at one point, when Mona was off to the powder room and I was glad-handing a customer, Carlos was over at our table, supposedly straightening our napkins. I saw him move the bag, and it's entirely possible that he looked inside. And then he was our waiter again on Friday night when Mona talked about Lacey joining a new health club, one with a squash court. It seems to me more than a coincidence that someone showed up at that club looking for her a few hours later. You just have to put 2 and 2 together, right?" Alex, it sounds like maybe Carlos was working to earn more than a tip Friday night. I gotta go, Alex. Talk to you soon. The instinct that had never failed him told Sloane that something was going terribly wrong. "Nick, I think it's time we go in and collect Ms. Farrell." "Why do that, Ed? We'll pick her up when she comes out." Sloane opened the door of the car and drew his pistol. "Let's go." Lacey wasn't sure if she actually heard a sound on the staircase, but then she heard it again. The faintest of sounds, but still very real. "There is someone on the staircase. I'm going to die." She saw terror creep into Mrs. Hoffman's eyes, so she put a warning finger to her lips, urging her to remain quiet. Her eyes fastened on a glass paperweight on the coffee table. It was about the size of a baseball. She couldn't reach it without getting up, something she was afraid to risk. Instead, she touched Mrs. Hoffman's hand and pointed to the paperweight. The staircase became exposed to Lacey's view halfway down. That's where he was now. Through the wooden spindles, she could see one well-polished shoe. A frail and trembling hand grasped the paperweight and slid it into Lacey's hand. Lacey stood up, swung her arm back, and as the assassin she knew as Caldwell came into full view, threw the paperweight with all the strength she could muster at his chest. The heavy piece of glass struck him right above the stomach, just as he prepared to move quickly down the remaining steps. The impact caused him to stumble and drop the pistol. Lacey immediately lunged to try to kick it away from his reach, just as Mrs. Hoffman, with faltering steps, made her way to the front door and flung it open. She screamed. Detective Sloane rushed past her into the entry hall. Just as Savarano's fingers were closing on the pistol, Sloane lifted his foot and smashed it down on Savarano's wrist. Behind him, Nick Mars aimed his pistol at Savarano's head and started to pull the trigger. Lacey screamed, "Don't!" Sloane whirled and slapped his partner's hand, causing the bullet intended for Savarano's head to go through Savarano's leg instead. The killer let out a howl of pain. Dazed, Lacey watched as Sloane handcuffed Isabel Waring's murderer, the sound of approaching sirens shrilling outside. U.S. Attorney Gary Baldwin appeared suddenly, surrounded by his agents. He looked at Sloane, at Lacey, then at Savarano. "So, you beat us to him. Congratulations." He leaned over Savarano. "Hi, Sandy. I've been looking for you. I'm preparing a cage that's got your name on it. The darkest, smallest cell at Marion, the roughest federal prison in the country. Locked down 23 hours a day, a tiny little cage, all your own for the rest of your life." He straightened up and turned to Lacey. "You all right, Ms. Farrell?" She nodded. Sloane went over to Nick Mars, whose face was chalk white. He took Nick's pistol, then opened his partner's jacket and took out his handcuffs. "Stealing evidence is bad enough. Attempted murder is a lot worse. You know what to do, Nick." Nick put his hands behind his back and turned. Sloane snapped Nick's own cuffs on him and gave him a grim smile. "Now they're really your handcuffs, Nick." Jimmy Landy did not emerge from his office all afternoon. Steve Abbott looked in on him several times. "Jimmy, you okay?" "Never better, Steve." At 5 o'clock, Landy received a phone call from Detective Sloane. "Mr. Landy, I'm at headquarters. I felt we owed it to you to fill you in. Your ex-wife's murderer is in custody. Ms. Farrell has positively identified him. He's also being charged with the death of Max Hoffman, and we may be able to prove that he was the one who ran your daughter's car off the road, too." "Who is he?" "Sandy Savarano is his name. He's a paid hitman. We expect him to cooperate fully in the investigation. He doesn't want to go to prison." "None of them do. Who hired him?" "We expect to know that very soon. Of much less magnitude, by the way. We have a suspect in the theft of your daughter's journal." "Ms. Farrell is here making a statement, sir. She'd like to talk to you." "Put her on." "Mr. Landy, I'm awfully glad this is over. It's been an ordeal for me, and I know it's been terrible for you as well. Mrs. Max Hoffman is with me. She has something to tell you." Lottie Hoffman came on the line. "Mr. Landy, I saw Heather at Mohonk. She was with a man, and when I described him to Max, he was so upset. He said the guy was a racketeer, a drug dealer, and that no one suspected him, least of all Heather." Even though she had heard it all before, it was chilling to Lacey to consider the appalling crimes committed after Max Hoffman warned Heather away from the man she was dating. She listened as Mrs. Hoffman described the man she had seen that day, Clearly it was no one she knew, Lacey thought with relief. Sloane took the phone from Mrs. Hoffman. "Does the man she describes sound like anyone you know, sir?" He listened for a moment, then turned to Lacey and Mrs. Hoffman. "Mr. Landy would appreciate it if you'd stop by his office now." All Lacey wanted to do was to get home to her own apartment, dress in her own clothes, and go to Kit's house to see everyone. They were having a late dinner, and Bonnie was staying up for it. "As long as it's just a few minutes to get there." "That's all it is. Then I'll drive you and Mrs. Hoffman home." Before they left, Sloane was called to the phone. He returned and told them, "We're going to have company at Landy's. Baldwin's on his way." The receptionist took them upstairs to where Jimmy was waiting. When Lottie Hoffman admired the handsome furnishings, Jimmy said, "The restaurant used to be half this size. When Heather was a baby, this was her room." Lacey thought that there was something in Landy's even, almost indifferent tone that made her think of an unnaturally calm ocean, one in which an underwater current was threatening to turn into a tidal wave. "Describe again exactly the man you saw with my daughter, please, Mrs. Hoffman." "He was very handsome. Wait, I'd like my partner to hear this." He turned on the intercom. "Steve, got a minute?" Steve Abbott came into the office smiling. "So, you're out of your cocoon at last, Jimmy. Oh, sorry, I didn't realize you had company." "Interesting company, Steve. Mrs. Hoffman, what's wrong?" Lottie Hoffman was pointing at Abbott. Her face was ghastly white. "You're the one I saw with Heather. You're the one Max said was a drug dealer and a racketeer and a thief. You're the reason I'm alone." Abbott's brows knitted fiercely. "What are you talking about?" The mask of gentility fell from his face. All of a sudden, Lacey thought it was possible to imagine this handsome, debonair man as a killer. Accompanied by a half-dozen agents, U.S. Attorney Gary Baldwin came into the room. "What she is saying, Mr. Abbott, is that you ordered her husband killed because he knew too much. You've been dropping the old suppliers like J. Taylor and buying from mob-owned businesses, and that's only one of your activities. Max had to tell Heather what you are, and she had to decide whether to let you keep cheating her father. You didn't take the chance. Savarano told us you called Heather and said Jimmy had had a heart attack and she should get right home. Savarano was waiting for her. When Isabel Waring wouldn't stop looking for reasons to prove Heather's death wasn't an accident, she became too dangerous." Abbott shouted at them, "That's a lie, Jimmy, I never—" Jimmy spoke calmly. "Yes, you did, Steve. You killed Max Hoffman, and you did the same to my daughter's mother. And to Heather. You killed her." Jimmy's eyes blazed with anger. His cry of agony exploded through the room. "You let my baby burn to death, you—" He lunged across the desk and wrapped his powerful hands around Abbott's throat. It took Sloane and the team of agents to pry his fingers loose. Jimmy's racking sobs echoed throughout the building as Baldwin took Steve Abbott into custody. At 8 o'clock, the driver Jay had sent to pick up Lacey at her apartment called to say he was downstairs. Lacey was frantic to see her family, but there was a phone call she still had to make. She dialed Tom's number. He was clearly thrilled to hear her voice. "Alice, where are you? Are you all right?" "Never better, Tom. And you?" "Worried sick. I've been going out of my mind since you disappeared." "It's a long story. You'll hear it all." She paused. "There's just one thing. Alice doesn't live here anymore. Do you think you could possibly get used to calling me Lacey? My name is Lacey Farrell."